Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to the NBA Deeper Dive by Awesemo.com. Sponsor of the show is Super Draft. Excited to talk a little bit about the multipliers today. And we're the show that's going to go game by game, giving you all the best plays and the sleepers. And I think we got a guy that nobody is going to be talking about today, DeMarcus Cousins. Adam, what are you thinking, man?
Yeah, kind of forgot he was on the slate because it was the first game I wrote up, and by the time I got done, I totally forgot about that game. But DeMarcus Cousins Day.
Yeah, this one should be good. It was crazy because when I ran the ownership projections this morning, he was like projected to be like 85% owned. I'm like, holy crap! Like, is there a bug or something? Like, how can this be possible? I don't think we've had a guy on a 2-game slate projected that high. But I think pretty much DeMarcus Cousins Day. But we need 7 other plays or 8 on FanDuel, so on Super Draft. So we'll have to go game by game to find 7 guys to pair with DeMarcus Cousins because, of course, he's impossible to not make the winning lineup. All right, so before we get into the games here, if you guys could hit the thumbs up button, greatly appreciate that. And we have a special promo going on Awesemo with the promo code Connor. You get a $2.57 MMA weekly pass. Of course, he's fighting Saturday night. That's going to be one of the best cards of the year, and it's only January, so pretty excited for that. So the first game, Chicago at Charlotte. Got a couple pieces of injury news here. We have Wendell Carter Jr. out, and then for Charlotte, we have Cody Zeller back. Now, Wendell Carter Jr., it's not immediately evident who's going to start for the Bulls. Oh, I guess Patrick Williams is back as well. He's been starting. So let's start there. Now, Wendell Carter Jr. being out should open up some value on the Bulls, and they got a nice matchup versus Charlotte. What are you projecting the Bulls as far as starting lineup, and who do you think is going to be the best plays?
Yeah, so my guess is that Lauri Markkanen slides to center here, and then either Otto Porter or Thaddeus Young joins the starting lineup along with Kobe White, Zach LaVine, and Patrick Williams. You could also, see Daniel Gafford get the start at center. That's possible, and if he does, he's minimum salary. But I expect that Markkanen's in the closing lineup at center, and my best guess is that he gets the start as well, which is good for him because he's been more productive in that role. Going back to last year, his rebound rate goes up as you would expect. His per minute production goes up when he's playing center as well. So I think Markkanen, it's a really big slate. It's not like he's someone that you're jamming into all your lineups, but I do think that if he starts at center, he's going to look good. He's a little bit underpriced. Played about 34 minutes last game as well. So the minutes are ramping back up after he missed some time with an injury. So that's good to see. So I think he looks really good. And then I have interest in whoever does join the starting lineup, whether it's Otto Porter or Thaddeus Young, because if Young joins the starting lineup, he's pretty cheap and he's a decent fantasy producer, about 0.9 DraftKings points per minute. And it would just signify, I think, that you can count on him to play 26 to 28 minutes at least. And then Otto Porter, if he joins the lineup, he's actually been really productive this year with over a fantasy point per minute. But I think it also sets up as a matchup that suits Porter's skill set. The Hornets have been really, really good this year at limiting pick and roll possessions. And as a result, they're allowing the numbers in deep dive article, I think it was 5.5 or 5 more spot up possessions per game to opponents than the next closest team in the league. So, and that plays into not only Porter, but also Lauri Markkanen's strength. So I think that if Porter starts, even though he's a little more expensive than I would like, I'd have some interest there.
I like that. Yeah, Porter, he started a few games this season, averaging about 28 minutes per start. So that would make him a plus value. Also, potential of Gafford starting. He might be a good value if he starts. The one thing is Gafford barely rebounds at all. So at least on the defensive end. So that's going to benefit Markkanen as far as rebounding, I think. So that would be a nice little bump to the Bulls starters. Gafford only has 11% defensive rebound or 9% defensive rebounding percentage this year. Well, Wendell Carter is at 21%. So the way they play is very different. Now on the Charlotte side, Cody Zeller's back. I'm kind of wondering, is he going to start? Is Bismack Biyombo going to get a couple starts as they ease Zeller back in? But I'm not seeing a ton of value either way on there. The more exciting players are the wings and guards for the Hornets, where they got Graham and Rozier as well as LaMelo Ball. And Gordon Hayward. It's no one's really popping for me. They all look solid, and Chicago defensively is not particularly good. Do you see any priorities on Charlotte?
I don't see priorities, but I do agree with you as far as like they're not popping out as far as being great values. I don't think that any of the main guys here are drastically underpriced, but I do think there's a good chance that at least one of these Charlotte guys puts up a score that really helps you in tournaments, because this is a really good matchup, both in terms of pace and in terms of Chicago being one of the least efficient defenses in the league. We know that you have guys on this team that can produce at a high rate. LaMelo Ball averaging over 1.3 DraftKings points per minute this year. The problem with him is there's always risk in paying over $7,000 for a guy that could very easily play 25 minutes. On the other hand, though, he can play 30 and he can triple double here. He leads the team in assist percentage. He leads the team in rebounding percentage, and he's second in usage, just behind Gordon Hayward. So the upside's there for LaMelo, but also a pretty low floor for the salary. Terry Rozier and Devontae Graham, you're getting a ton of assists from Graham, a higher usage rate from Rozier. He's been a better fantasy producer on a per minute basis. Both guys played 38 minutes last game, so they clearly have the ability, if they're playing well, to stay on the floor. And then Hayward has kind of been the most consistent guy this year, typically playing at least 34 or 35 minutes in competitive games, averaging a little over a fantasy point per minute. He's pretty expensive as well. So there's not one guy where I look and it's just like, oh, this is the guy that I really want from Charlotte. But I do think that will drive ownership down a little bit, since none of them really stand out. And there's a really good chance that someone in this group has a really big game.
Nice. So I like that. I think there's some upside plays here. The prices aren't super cheap, but we got some solid talents. LaMelo, I feel like he could close over Rozier. It's been kind of a hot hand situation. Rozier has been the hotter hand recently, but that could flip. So I feel like everyone's a little bit low on LaMelo today, but his price is pretty high too. And one guy that I think might take a hit with Zeller coming back is PJ Washington. PJ Washington had been the backup center, kind of like starting, playing in 3 shifts a half, basically backing up Biyombo in the second shift. Now, there's still potential he could close at center for both halves. So I'm not exactly sure how this rotation is going to shake out. Any lean there?
My guess, and you mentioned it at the top, that we don't know yet what they're doing exactly with Zeller. If Zeller starts, my guess is that you get, Zeller playing 20 to 24 minutes, coming back from his hand injury. Biyombo probably playing some backup minutes, and then maybe you still get a little bit of run for Washington. I think at like in a best case scenario, you're still getting some time for Washington, but I'd be surprised if Biyombo's completely out of the rotation. And that's kind of what you would need for Washington to stay where he was. So I think that kind of by definition, Washington's going to be a little bit overpriced until his salary comes back down with Zeller being back, because it's pretty unlikely he gets as many center minutes as he was. And that's what was driving a lot of his value.
Agreed. So I think Charlotte got some plays. Chicago more interesting. Now, the next game, Orlando at Indiana. The big news that we're waiting on is Miles Turner is questionable. He's got like a hand fracture, but he was warming up before the last game. It's unclear what their intentions are there. When he was out, Doug McDermott started and saw pretty good minutes, and then that kind of trickled down to guys like Justin Holiday, seeing more minutes than usual. And I mean, Sabonis and Brogdon have been really good fantasy options this year. The matchup versus Orlando, not particularly good. They're a pretty slow-paced team. So what are you looking at with this Pacers team?
Pretty much just those two, Brogdon and Sabonis. Turner's availability affects it as far as Sabonis is more productive when he plays center. So just like we were talking about with Markkanen last game, if Turner's out and Sabonis starts at center, you can expect him to produce at a higher rate and be an even better play. But with or without Turner, I think Sabonis looks good here. He's just been really, really productive this year, averaging about 1.27 DraftKings points per minute, almost 38 minutes per game this season for Sabonis as well. Like you said, not the best matchup against Orlando, and his salary has gotten up. With it being an 11-game slate, there's a ton of guys to pay up for. So I don't think Sabonis is someone that you're going to be getting into 65% of your lineups or anything like that, but you are going to be happy when you get to him. He just looks like a good play regardless, but a better play if Turner's out. And then Brogdon averaging about 37, 38 minutes per game in the 10 games he's played since TJ Warren's injury. He's averaged almost 1.2 DraftKings points per minute this year. Price tag is relatively expensive as well. And you kind of run into the same problem where there's just a lot of options. So it's going to thin out your exposure to pretty much everyone in the price range. But Brogdon, I think, still a little bit underpriced for his ceiling, despite the tough matchup against Orlando, just based on how many minutes he plays.
Nice. Yeah, I think that Brogdon and Sabonis are pretty solid values as well. Now, this game's at lock, so we shouldn't have any surprises afterwards. But say 30 minutes prior to lock, Miles Turner's ruled out. Doug McDermott's $4,200 on FanDuel. Would you remake your lineups at that point to get McDermott? Or, I mean, that seems like a pretty good price point.
I think it's fine. McDermott, around a 0.8 fantasy point per minute player. The thing is, like, on DraftKings, he's up to 5K. I'm just really not interested there. But even on FanDuel, the price is good, but it's something that I know you mention a lot. The price is good on a lot of guys on FanDuel compared to DraftKings. So, McDermott, I think, would be a fine value, but it's still not someone that I'm really in love with, just because outside of the games, like we had a couple nights ago where McDermott just makes every shot and scores 15 points in a quarter, he just doesn't do that much when he's on the floor. You also have Jeremy Lamb back, who played about 20 minutes last game. Potentially, if he plays a couple more minutes, you could see him kind of start eating into some combination of McDermott or Justin Holiday. Jakar Sampson was back as well. So, I think it's a situation where if Turner's out, McDermott starts and gets the first crack, but it's not the same situation that it was a couple of games ago where he has to play monster minutes. Like, there's a lot of ways the rotation can go if he's playing a normal game and just kind of, not hitting every shot that he takes, where he eventually loses a little bit of run.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think that if he's not scoring, that's really the only value add he brings to the team. So he could easily see his minutes trickle away. On the Orlando side, Evan Fournier came back last game and played a full complement of minutes. Today we have Michael Carter-Williams questionable. But, I mean, the main guys on this team are really Aaron Gordon and Vucevic. Vucevic played like an insane amount of minutes last game as they kind of came from behind to, I think they won the game on back. He played like 40 minutes or something insane when he's been averaging 33. Gordon, he's seen his minutes be pretty good since the minutes limit earlier in the season was kind of revoked. So do you see any value on this Orlando side?
It's kind of similar to the Indiana side, where I'm not really interested in the cheap guys so much as I am the guys at the top. But obviously, with the guys at the top, you're competing with a lot of other really good players. I think Vooch looks good. His price points come up a little bit. The matchup isn't as good as it was last game against Minnesota, but in competitive games, you're typically going to get around 34 minutes from him, and he averages over 1.4 fantasy points per minute. So he's still a really high upside guy. He leads the team in usage, leads the team in rebounding, and he has over a 20% assist percentage as well. So nothing wrong with Vooch. It's just you're basically losing one center spot right off the jump on this slate with DeMarcus Cousins. And then if you're playing on a two center site, that still obviously only leaves you with the one spot where you have Vooch, you have Jokic that we'll talk about. You have so many other centers that you're interested in as well. Aaron Gordon, I think, a little bit more favorably priced on FanDuel than DraftKings, but he has been playing 34 to 36 minutes in competitive games. Usage rates up this year. His assist percentage is actually up at 20% as well, which has been nice to see. Fournier being back and then potentially Carter-Williams being back maybe starts to take some assists away from Gordon. But I think overall he's just been more involved offensively, which is good and gives him a higher ceiling. Cole Anthony is still cheap and someone that if I'm playing a lot of tournament lineups, I would have some interest in. He's averaged 28 minutes per game since Markelle Fultz's injury. He started out shooting really, really poorly, but the usage rate's still up around 24, 25% in those starts. And he's up to almost 0.9 fantasy points per minute. Fournier coming back could take some ball handling away from Cole Anthony potentially. Same with Carter-Williams, but I'm willing, if I'm playing a lot of tournament lineups, I think you can gamble on a $5,200 price tag there.
Nice. Yeah, and we got to mention with Cole Anthony that he hit the buzzer beater 3 to win the game in the last game. I mean, it's hard not to draw some sort of narrative that maybe the coach will have more confidence after he literally won the game for the team. So would you factor that in at all, or is that just kind of being a little bit too speculative?
I think it's being a little bit too speculative, especially like if Carter Williams comes back. I don't think they're giving like Cole Anthony another 4 minutes just because he made a big shot last game.
Yeah, I could see if he got maybe 30 a game instead of 28. We'll see. But he looks like a pretty solid value, even if we just assume the baseline of minutes. Aaron Gordon did lead the team in assists, as you were saying last game, so that's pretty intriguing. For Houston and Detroit, I mean, this is really the game of the night. At least DeMarcus Cousins is the play of the night. Now, the center matchup versus Mason Plumlee is not particularly scary, so I'm not thinking Cousins will have trouble staying on the floor. And he's been absurdly productive this year when he's been on the floor. I mean, like 1.5 fantasy points per minute. It's 4,400 on DraftKings and 4,500 on FanDuel. What are we doing here?
He's clearly the best value, and he produces at such a high rate that he still gives you a nice like raw point ceiling as well. The only argument I can see for not rostering Cousins is ownership, obviously, and it would involve kind of getting out of that price tier at center completely. I think going to like on DraftKings, going to Joel Embiid, Jokic combination, or Vooch or something like that, like getting two of the expensive centers, hoping they both give you 50 to 60 points, and that they just kind of burn Cousins, and Cousins gives you like 30 or something, where it's a good value, but it's still only 30 points. That would kind of be the way around rostering Cousins, but still, like it's not like there's not really high upside plays at other positions. You're still clearly going to be putting yourself at a disadvantage in terms of likelihood of success if you don't go to Cousins. And there's also no guarantee. I mean, I don't think he should be projected for more than like 22 to 24 minutes, because the only game this year that he played more than 18 minutes was the last game he started, where he played 23 minutes. But I did think it was interesting in that game, all 23 of his minutes came in the first three quarters. He didn't play at all in the fourth quarter. And so on one hand, it makes me think that it was kind of by design. They didn't want to play him more. But on the other hand, like, why didn't they, if the plan was only to play 23 minutes, why didn't they space it out, have him on the floor at the end of the game? If that game kind of went differently, could he have played more minutes? So I think that his projection should be in the low to mid 20s in minutes, but there's definitely a non-zero chance that he's able to just play more minutes than we're expecting, in which case he is absolutely going to be needed, because he's going to put up one of the best raw scores and the best point per dollar values.
Yeah, I feel like I watched that game because I was so interested in what would happen with Cousins, and he just looks pretty slow out there. And I kind of think that's why I wasn't playing in the fourth quarter, is just because on the defensive end, he doesn't have it. But this Detroit team is like pretty bad offensively. So I'm thinking, like, if it's Blake Griffin and Miles or Mason Plumlee that he has to hang with, he has a lot better chance of playing the fourth quarter. So I think that this matchup is going to work in his favor. Now, Oladipo and Gordon look pretty appealing as well with Christian Wood out. I mean, the usage in the starting unit, Cousins is a little bit lower than Wood, so that's not like going to make a huge impact on that particular lineup. But then once Cousins comes off the court, whoever is in this bench lineup, which will have some minutes of Gordon and some of Oladipo, is going to be the man when it comes to taking a bunch of shots. So I think Oladipo and Gordon both look pretty interesting. I don't have a strong lean between them. Maybe you can help us figure it out.
Yeah, I think they both look decent as well. I would lean toward Oladipo just because I think he's the number one option here. Like Gordon, we've kind of seen relatively small sample, but we had a one or two games last year and a couple games the year before that where he played with Harden out and either Westbrook or Chris Paul, depending on the year, active. And he produced about 0.8 fantasy points per minute in those games. He's at 0.9 fantasy points per minute overall this year. I think it's just kind of that same similar situation where when he's playing alongside Oladipo is going to dominate the assist opportunities. He's going to dominate the shots, but then Gordon's going to get those minutes with the second unit and he's going to be the guy there. And so it's going to add up to, I think, make Gordon a good, point per dollar value, especially because he played 34 minutes last game. Whereas Oladipo, though, he has that ability to just break a slate open, given the opportunities that he has. The only concern I have with Oladipo is that while he was averaging over 34 minutes per game with the Pacers this year, he's only played 32 and 31 minutes in his 2 games with Houston. I assume at some point he starts playing more minutes, but I don't know that that's tonight. I don't know when that'll be. And if he's only going to play 31 minutes, then his price tag is kind of expensive. But that being said, he's still got at least 22 field goal attempts up in each of these 2 games, led the team in potential assists in both games, led the team in touches. He's clearly who the offense is running through. So I still think you have a really, really high ceiling for Oladipo.
Yeah, I think Christian Wood being out too might make him see a few more minutes, just because that's one high usage guy that's not going to be on the court. They're going to need that. Got a super chat from Matt92 in YouTube. He says you need someone from the late night slate in your lineup to win a tournament. Adam, I'll throw this one to you.
I wonder if that's the person that's been saying that on Twitter for the last week, or if he's
Yeah, so I guess no. I mean, there's 11 games on this slate, so there's so many different ways to build lineups that don't have anyone from the late games. That it's not really a factor tonight. I don't think it really is a huge factor any night, but maybe on like a short slate where there's 4 games.
Well, and this isn't even one of those slate that's always like been a talking point in NBA, especially a couple of years ago when like only a few teams played really fast and they were all in the Western Conference. So it just turned out that the highest scoring games on the slate were like always the last games. But even tonight, like looking at the 3 late game matchups, you have the slowest team in the league with the Knicks. You have a game with a 220 total, which is completely normal, and then a game with a 13-point spread in LA. So it's not even one of those slates where there's like a 240 total at the end of the night.
Yeah, definitely not a huge standout game. Of course, this Houston-Detroit one's the huge game in the earlier games. Now, Cousins multiplier in Super Draft is only 1.55. That makes it a little bit more interesting over there. So that's something to keep in mind. All right. On the Detroit side, it's a little bit tough because they're really not trying to go all out to win games at this point. They have a rotation that features a lot of young guys trying to get all these guys experience. But we have a couple of guys that have really solid work roles in Jeremy Grant and Blake Griffin. Jeremy Grant this year has seen his usage go way up, and that's part of the reason he came to Detroit. So he's established himself as a pretty good fantasy option. The price is high, though, at $8,100 on DraftKings, $8,400 on FanDuel. But he is a top super draft play with a 1.6 multiplier. How do you feel about Jeremy Grant on this new team?
I've actually been really impressed with him. He's doing a lot better than I expected this year. I thought that with the increase in usage that his shooting percentage and his efficiency would go down. He actually has almost an identical true shooting percentage this year as he did last year, with like a usage rate that's like 8 points higher or something like that. So he's actually been really impressive, I think, as far as his ability to score. He's been a lot more consistent than I expected him to be. But it's still going to be tough on a slate like this because you just have guys in this price range that I think are a little bit better. You know, you're getting 1.14 DraftKings points per minute this year from Grant, but he's basically, across positions, but he's basically the same price point as Malcolm Brogdon, who we already talked about getting 1.2 points per minute. Oladipo, who is, the guy clearly right now on Houston on the other side of this game. So while Grant himself, I still think, is a high upside play. He's averaging over 36 minutes this year as well. It's just really, really difficult, I think, to prioritize him over some of the other options in what is just a stacked like 8 to 9K price range.
Definitely. I think he's not the sexiest option at 8,100 on DraftKings. So I might go to him a little bit for that reason, is maybe just not drawing a ton of clicks on the draft screen. Now, Mason Plumlee is an interesting guy because with the center rotation, like a lot of nights they'll have 3 centers playing with Isaiah Stewart and Jahlil Okafor. On nights where they don't have a 3-center rotation, Mason Plumlee has been pretty successful in fantasy, and he's pretty cheap. Now he's a center, so I don't want to waste too much time since we're all going to have Cousins, but are you going to have any Plumlee as well?
It's just so difficult, I think, on this particular slate because like assuming Cousins is taking 1-year center spots, if you go to Plumlee, it by definition means you're not getting to Vooch, Jokic, Embiid. Like you're giving up a lot of points at the center position for someone in Plumlee that like even if he does, and you're right about the rotation, Okafor played 9 minutes last game after being a DNP the 2 games previous. Even if you get that like 30 to 32 minute game from Plumlee, you're basically expecting 30 to 32 fantasy points, which I just really don't think is getting it done at a center position that has a massive opportunity cost tonight. So it's just really tough. I think he's a good point per dollar play, but he's not really the kind of ceiling guy that I want in tournaments.
Yeah, agreed. Tough to get to tonight just because of the other centers. Brooklyn at Cleveland. I think this one's pretty interesting for the studs because Kevin Durant was ruled out after playing 50 minutes or something insane in the last game. So that's going to give a boost to Kyrie Irving and James Harden. 2 guys that probably don't complement each other well, but they're going to need people to take shots. They lost this game to Cleveland a couple of days ago, double OT. So I have a feeling they're going to be very motivated tonight to not drop a second one in a row. And we need Kyrie to be a little bit motivated out there. So how are you feeling about Kyrie and Harden?
I like them both with Durant out. It's still tough to feel really confident in how to project these guys playing alongside each other. But we can at least, when there's only the 2 of them playing, we can at least kind of draw conclusions from things we've seen in the past. Like James Harden last year when he played in games that Russell Westbrook played, Harden averaged 1.54 DraftKings points per minute. If you go back to Kyrie's time with Boston and look at games that he played with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, not that they're the same as Harden, obviously, but they're both relatively high usage guys. Irving averaged about 1.3 DraftKings points per minute. If you go all the way back to his time with LeBron, he averaged 1.1 DraftKings points per minute, but he's obviously taken on bigger roles since then. My best guess is that if Harden and Irving were to play together, just the 2 of them long term, you would see Irving come in around 1.2 to 1.3 DraftKings points per minute. Harden, I think, would get you 1.5 to 1.6. In the 40 minutes that they played together last game, Harden only had a 19% usage rate while Kyrie had a 31% usage rate. But I'm not really reading into that just because of what we know about James Harden. Like I expect him to eventually be the guy between him and Irving. So I think both are a little bit underpriced given that Durant is out. They should play huge minutes and they're clearly going to be the only 2 guys on this offense touching the ball, I would expect.
Definitely. I love both of these guys. We've been seeing in the minutes for the Stars in Brooklyn be huge, and they can stand out in today's slate, although the price on Harden is very high. Now, DeAndre Jordan, someone who might get a bump, as well as Joe Harris, but on this slate, I'd say they aren't huge priorities.
Yeah, I was interested in Jordan when I wrote the deep dive because this was like the 2nd or 3rd game that I wrote. And so I was excited because I think he can get close to 30 minutes tonight with Durant out. But then once I finished the slate and realized how stacked the center position was, it's still really tough.
Nice. On Cleveland, I'm pretty much off of them. Darius Garland is questionable tonight. I'd be kind of wondering if he's a little bit limited after missing a ton of games. We saw Colin Sexton just come back full strength, but with so many guys back in the lineup with Jared Allen and Taurean Prince joining the Cavs, I'm just not seeing any value here. How about yourself?
Yeah, it just doesn't look like a spot that I really want to get to on this slate. The big thing that I was looking at was I wanted to see what the center rotation looked like. I think that it's a positive sign that JaVale McGee didn't play. You only got Drummond and Allen playing. But still, I think you're just going to get, normally like 27, 28 minutes from Drummond, 20, 21 from Allen. Not that there won't be games where Drummond plays more or Allen plays more, but an 11-game slate with a million good center options isn't really the one where I'm looking to plug these guys in and then pray that they play more minutes than I think they're going to.
Definitely. Got a super chat from Sam. He says, do you utilize position stacks on Fantasy Cruncher and NBA? Any other suggestions? So check out the game plan. I'll go through Fantasy Cruncher strategy, and we got some other guys doing videos kind of going through the tools. That's our preview video. So what I use in Fantasy Cruncher primarily as far as correlations is groups. I don't want the backups of guys and the starters in the same lineup. Like a good example could be like maybe a DeAndre Jordan and Jeff Green where only one of them can close, and that affects the upside of both of them getting there. So that's the main feature on NBA I use. Kevin says, can you play Oladipo and Gordon together? I think that's definitely a yes. But if we have both of those guys and Cousins, is that too much Rockets? Or are you feeling that?
I think it's fine. I'd probably actually, I was gonna say I probably would want to run it back with Detroit, but I don't even know that that's necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's too many Rockets. I would say that I wouldn't want that to be like the majority of my builds.
Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, Super Draft is our sponsor here. And if you haven't checked them out, there's no salary cap. Instead, you're given a multiplier, which multiplies the number of fantasy points that you get for each play. And because of that, lineup building is a lot easier. And it can be a lot more profitable too, because in NBA, going for those high multiplier guys, everything else being constant, gives you more upside in your lineups. And we have projections for Super Draft to help make it even easier on the site. So make sure to check them out, superdraft.io. They have NBA and in addition, NFL, PGA, MMA, and a lot of other sports. So superdraft.io. Boston at Philadelphia. We got Seth Curry coming back tonight. Kemba Walker is playing his third game back. He's been playing pretty well, but the minutes have been limited, so I don't really see any way to get to him tonight. But Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart have seen their usage go up with Tatum continuing to be out, so they look like plays. How are you feeling about the Celtics?
Yeah, I really like the ownership on them too, particularly Jaylen Brown. I've already mentioned that this 8 to 9K price point is stacked, but Jaylen Brown's per minute production hasn't really changed with or without Jason Tatum. Both, if you just look at the entire season and take Tatum on and off the floor, or if you look at the 3 games that Tatum has missed. But what has changed is that his usage rate and his assist percentage have gone up. It's just that it hasn't so far translated to more fantasy points per minute, but it does mean he's getting more opportunities. It means at the very least he has a higher ceiling, and also there's a good chance that as you get more minutes in these situations that his per minute production goes up as well. But the fact that he's been relatively disappointing in these 3 games, when Tatum first went down, you had everyone just jamming Jaylen Brown in at basically the same price point, but now everyone has basically the combination of it's a big slate and people saying, okay, well, maybe Jaylen Brown's just not going to take a step up. It gives you the opportunity to get that ceiling at really low ownership. Plus he's Ford eligible, which is nice as well. So I think Jaylen Brown in tournaments, only projected for about 8% ownership right now, is really nice. Smart, less excited about him, but kind of the same thing. Has a 26% usage rate in the games since Tatum went down. As Kemba plays more minutes, you'll see Smart start to come back to earth. Plus, I think that the usage rate probably just comes down a little bit anyway because it's Marcus Smart. But at the same time, there's nobody else really taking shots on this team outside of Brown, Kemba, and Smart. So, I think that there is still some upside on Smart at his salary as well.
I like it. I think this matchup versus Philadelphia, one of the higher paced teams in the league, has some upside for Smart and Brown. On the Philadelphia side, with Seth Curry coming back, we're going to see a little bit less from Milton and Maxey and Danny Green. But we got some really great fantasy players with Embiid, Harris, and Simmons. How do you feel about them tonight?
Basically just Embiid for me. I mean, you can see how Harris or Simmons could have a big game. Harris's salary on DraftKings at 7,100, I think is fine. You're still expecting him to play 33 to 34 minutes. He's averaged almost 1.1 fantasy points per minute with Embiid this year. Simmons is a little bit tougher for me. 1.2 DraftKings points per minute in the games with Embiid, but he's a little bit more expensive. And just, I just have trouble trusting in someone where I need him to get rebounds, but he's not the best rebounder on the team. I need him to get assists, and then I need him to score, but he's afraid to shoot. So it's not really my favorite guy there. I do really like Embiid, though, if you can get up to his salary. Obviously, it's tough at center, but he's just been excellent all season long. Almost 1.6 DraftKings points per minute. You're getting, around 33 minutes, maybe 34 if this game's competitive. And I think he should be able to have success against this Boston front court. So definitely tough to get to, but that should keep his ownership down as well.
Yeah, if I'm going contrarian at center, going to a really high performer like Embiid instead of just pivoting off Cousins, I think is a better strategy. We got a super chat from Shem. Thank you, Shem. He's saying GPP, Jokic, Gordon, and Powell, assuming Lowry and VanVleet is out, or Brogdon, Hayward, Bagley. Oh man, that's a tough one. I guess.
Yeah, I like them all.
Yeah, both of those are solid. I guess I'd lean the second one because Jokic is a little bit tougher to roster tonight with Cousins Day, depending on the site. I don't know. Which way do you lean?
Yeah, I mean, if it's DraftKings, I like getting to the Jokic one. If it's FanDuel, then I would go to the other one because Jokic means no Cousins.
Nice. All right. Miami at Toronto. I think Tyler Hero is still questionable. That's going to be some news we're going to have to look out for because Kendrick Nunn totally dominated in the last game where he's out. Nunn's priced up a lot tonight, so I probably wouldn't count on that. But Dragic is still pretty reasonably priced at $6K on DraftKings at $5,200 on FanDuel. And then Bam Adebayo is pretty expensive, but a very good fantasy player. So what are you doing here if Tyler Hero's out? And if he's in, do you see anyone to play?
Yeah, so if Hero's out, I think the main beneficiaries are Dragic, Nunn, and Gabe Vincent, who started and played 28 minutes last game. Vincent, not a very good fantasy producer. He's about 0.77 DraftKings points per minute overall this year. But in the minutes he's played with Bam Adebayo so far, he's averaging half of a fantasy point per minute. Still, though, he's basically minimum salary and probably plays 28 minutes if he starts. So wouldn't be the end of the world in large field tournaments. But if Hero's out, you would expect Dragic to start, play 31, 32 minutes again. He's averaged about 1.1 DraftKings points per minute in games that Butler has sat since last season. So he would still look like a pretty solid option, especially on FanDuel. He's only 5,200. And then Kendrick Nunn, he's up to 6,200 on FanDuel, 5,400 on DraftKings. So definitely not the very easy play that he was last time when he was only 4K. There was basically no downside there as long as he actually played, which he did. He's closed 3 games in a row playing 27, 34, and 34 minutes. At 5,400, there's a lot more risk. He's still, if he plays 34 minutes off the bench, he's still a good play at 5,400. It's just that he's not guaranteed to play those 34 minutes. There's a lot of ways that he can play 26. And if he plays 26, he's probably not getting there at 5,400. So there's a lot more risk, also a lot less ownership. He would be someone that I'm still okay with in tournaments, but definitely a lot lower on him than I was last slate when he was 4K.
Yeah, definitely. If he gets off the bench, it's always a possibility, but it's such a big slate. On the other side, Kyle Lowry and Pascal Siakam are both questionable tonight. Now, I don't think we really have any way to get insight into whether they're playing or not because they both closed out the last game and then they missed practice yesterday. Or I guess Siakam missed practice yesterday. Kyle Lowry just was added to the injury report. We just got the news Miles Turner will play tonight, so that mitigates some interest on the Pacers that we were talking about earlier. Now, if Siakam, Lowry, and VanVleet all are in, I think they look pretty good. But if Siakam or Lowry's out, that's going to make these guys real big priorities, I would think. How are you feeling about the Raptors?
Yeah, it's just, huge news on both of these guys because if they're all in, then, something Lofty and I have talked about before, it's really crazy how the per minute production and the playing time for all 3 of these guys is almost the exact same this season. And it kind of just makes it so, and the pricing's all the same. So it kind of just makes it so you can just in tournaments roster the lowest owned one and feel pretty good about it. But if one of them's out, it changes everything because if Lowry's out, then VanVleet goes from, he's averaged 1.02 DraftKings points per minute in games with Lowry since last year, 1.17 fantasy points per minute in games without him. And then VanVleet also is, taking that step forward this year in terms of production anyway. So VanVleet would look great if Lowry sits, whereas he's just kind of another guy that is a decent play if Lowry's in. Siakam gets a slight bump if Lowry's out as well, not as much as VanVleet. If Siakam's out, then you get more usage and potentially assists for VanVleet and Lowry. If Siakam and Lowry are both out, VanVleet just becomes the clear number 1 option for Toronto. But if either of those two are out, Lowry or Siakam, you probably get Norman Powell in the starting lineup as well. He's averaged a little over 30 minutes per game in his starts going back to last year. And at a pretty cheap salary, he would be a good value too. So a lot of moving pieces there. You also potentially, if Siakam's out, it helps to solidify minutes for Chris Boucher. In this matchup last time, Boucher only played 22 minutes because Siakam closed. Terrence Davis was playing really well off the bench. Siakam closed at center and Boucher didn't close. If Siakam's out, obviously you're not running that risk, and Boucher would have a lot better chance of getting, his 28 to 30 minutes that you need from him. OG Anunoby would slide down to the 4, get more rebounding chances. It just a lot of moving pieces here where if one or both of these guys are out, plays are going to look a lot better than they do right now.
Nice. Yeah, so what I'm doing here is I'm going through my list in Fantasy Cruncher and I'm adding a couple points to VanVleet, Lowry, and Siakam because I want to get these guys at a higher level than I'll get if I just make a crunch. So that when this injury news comes out, it'll probably be around 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll have a lineup that's already good to go. Whereas if I have Lowry or Siakam and they're ruled out, then I can just make a late swap to a different guy. All right. And then Powell also, I like that. A little bit tougher to plan for. He's 4,300 on DraftKings, so that's a pretty good price. Now on Miami, so we talked about Miami. So let's go to Atlanta and Minnesota. Atlanta, we got some injuries as well with DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish questionable after missing the previous game. I don't know if the guys that will benefit a ton will be like huge plays, but we'd have more value on Atlanta in a good matchup versus Minnesota. So how are you playing this Atlanta Hawks situation where we don't know if they're going to be shorthanded?
Yeah, 3 questionable guys because Gallinari was doubtful on the injury report, but then it was tweeted later that he was questionable, Reddish questionable, and Hunter questionable. If all those guys are out, then I assume Solomon Hill starts again. He played about 35 minutes in regulation last game. He's a terrible fantasy producer, but he's also close to minimum salary, and he's a forward, which is a relatively weak position on a slate where there's a ton of guys I want to pay up for. So he'd have some value here if all of those guys are out. If all those guys are out, you also would get a ton of minutes from Kevin Huerter again, who is 5,900 on DraftKings now after being 9,500 last slate. They flipped that salary back around to how it should be. He would, in this matchup be another, not priority, but someone that's going to play a lot of minutes and, has a decent role. I would expect that he gets a lot of minutes, even if one of those guys plays. Like if Gallinari and Reddish are out and Hunter's in, I still think you get big minutes for Huerter. I don't think you get big minutes for Hill. If all of them are in, then I don't have much interest in any of those guys. I think Cam Reddish at 4,600 on DraftKings, if he's starting, would probably be the most appealing from that group, but still just not that appealing.
Yeah, agreed. So a little bit tough to get to some of these guys, but we've seen Capela have some big games, and Collins, he seemed to benefit a little bit with some decreased depth. On the Minnesota side, with Karl-Anthony Towns continuing to be out due to COVID, we've seen the rates for Russell and Beasley go up. And then a couple of guys that don't normally get huge minutes, and Jared Vanderbilt and Naz Reid start to see starting roles and be somewhat productive. But despite the decent matchup versus Atlanta, I'm not really seeing a ton of value in DFS, although Vanderbilt and Reid are pretty cheap on FanDuel. What do you make of Timberwolves?
Yeah, it's just not really pricing that I love. Jared Vanderbilt 2 games ago started against the Hawks, played about 29 minutes. Last game he started, played 17 minutes. You saw Jaden McDaniels play well off the bench, and then Minnesota closed small with Jordan McLaughlin joining Beasley and Russell in the lineup, Josh Okogie sliding down to the 4. So Vanderbilt is someone that's been pretty productive this year, and if he plays well, I think the minutes are there for him. The problem is just that he's not really cheap anymore. So, even if he gets 30 minutes, he's around a fantasy point per minute guy. He's still basically just a neutral play at that point. The same really goes for Reid, who's averaging about 0.9 fantasy points per minute with Russell on the floor this year, but he takes up a center spot on a slate where I really don't want to be giving a center spot to Naz Reid. So tough to get to those guys. Russell's got a monster ceiling as always, 1.28 DraftKings points per minute in games without Towns this year. But he's the same price as Jaylen Brown. He's the same price as Vooch. He's the same price as so many of these guys across a bunch of positions where, he's more expensive than Oladipo. It's just really, really tough to prioritize him.
Yeah, this is a tough team to get to for sure. Maybe on the express slate playing some Naz Reid or something. All right, Dallas at San Antonio. Now this one's a little bit better because we got some superstars and Luka and Porzingis, and we also have the Mavs continue to be a little shorthanded due to COVID. So we saw Jalen Brunson draw a start. He's a little bit less high usage in the starting lineup with Luka than we're used to. And then Trey Burke came off the bench and played a ton of minutes. But their prices have gone up, so I'm kind of left with Luka as being a priority, but no one else is really standing out a ton. How are you feeling about the Mavs?
Yeah, so Luka clearly the priority. Same price point as James Harden, same price point as Jokic. So pretty stacked pricing tier there, but clearly really good player, averaging about 1.6 DraftKings points per minute. Usage rates up around 35%, assist percentage is pushing 50%. He's great. He's leading the team in minutes played as well. Not a great matchup against San Antonio, but not a bad one either. 12th in the league in pace, 12th in defensive rating this year. So I think Luka's a really good play if you can get to him. I'm really interested in Porzingis too. The playing time has been good, typically getting 32, 33 minutes recently after he's come back from his injury. But he started at center over Willie Cauley-Stein last game, which we talked about it earlier with Sabonis, but it's the same thing for Porzingis, where his rates go up, his production goes up when you're getting minutes at center. And this matchup against the Spurs, where LaMarcus Aldridge is the starting center for San Antonio, I expect Dallas to go with that same lineup tonight, where it's Porzingis at the 5. So I think that being able to roster him at power forward, but get him playing minutes at center, and his salary still hasn't really gone up that much, is pretty appealing, because I think he's still a little bit underpriced here.
Definitely, yeah. I think that he should see more boards with Willie Cauley-Stein coming off the bench, most likely in this matchup. So I like the Porzingis call. And Tim Hardaway Jr. seems to have a little bit of a cheap price tag. Any love there?
I wouldn't say love. He made his way into the deep dive article just as this is the kind of guy that I like to throw darts at in tournaments if I'm playing a lot of lineups, because he's going to play a lot of minutes. He's clearly not going to he's the third option offensively behind Luka and Porzingis, and it's a pretty distant third, but he's capable of getting hot. And in tournaments, you just need to have him when he gets hot. Obviously there's no real way to predict that, but the opportunities will be there and you're not really paying a premium for him. So, last guy in type guy in tournaments is fine.
Nice. We did see Michael Carter Jr. is listed out on the most recent Orlando report. Not a huge DFS factor today, but worth noting.
No minutes limit for Cody Zeller either.
No minutes limit. That's pretty good to know. On the San Antonio side, we've been seeing Devin Vassell get a little bit more run off the bench and kind of stealing some minutes from Lonnie Walker. I'd say overall the starting unit has not played very well, particularly recently. But they do have some good talent and upside. So do you see some reason to go back to the Spurs today, or are they not standing out?
The price tag on LaMarcus Aldridge is going to draw me in until it increases or I go broke, one of the two. He hasn't been good this year. He's only averaging 0.9 fantasy points per minute. He's only averaging about 27.5 minutes per game, and he hasn't stepped on the floor in the fourth quarter in 3 straight games. So those are all the reasons not to like LaMarcus Aldridge. The flip side of that is prior to those 3 games, he was getting at least 30 minutes a night pretty consistently. He's still LaMarcus Aldridge. He's not playing well this year, but we have a long track record of him being a good fantasy player, and he's $5,500 on DraftKings, which I didn't go back through Fantasy Cruncher, but I would assume this is the lowest salary we've had on Aldridge possibly ever. So I'm interested in tournaments just based on talent alone, basically. I think that whenever someone of Aldridge's pedigree is playing really poorly and it's driving down his ownership and also driving down his salary, it starts to become kind of appealing, even though he hasn't played well. So I do have interest there. Murray and DeRozan have actually been good this year. I think they're priced about where they should be. They're good contrarian pieces if you have a chalkier lineup and need to get it to a lower owned guy. They do have high ceilings, but they're clearly not in the best spots on the slate.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel pretty confident getting them in there, but they're not priorities. All right, we got an interesting quote that El Negro Loco retweeted in our Awesemo NBA account. As far as back-to-back, Silas says they'll deal with tomorrow. Oladipo and others will play regular minutes tonight for the Rockets. So actually that would be a consideration, especially with Cousins, since Wood is doubtful tomorrow. But that's reassuring there. All right, guys. So gotten through 2/3 of the games here. If you haven't hit that like button, then better do it now, or else we're gonna get very mad. So appreciate you guys hitting that thumbs up. We also have a special announcement for those of you guys in Michigan. So I'm a Michigan guy. I haven't won much money betting on the Detroit teams though, so I might next time I'm there go to some of these new sports books and bet against them. But if you go to Awesemo Odds on Twitter, you can see all the deposit bonuses. BetMGM is offering 100% match for up to $500. And that's just free money, basically, of $500. So make sure to hit up Awesemo Odds. And if you're in Michigan, And we got to have offers for other states as well if sports betting is already legal in your state. All right. Oklahoma City at the Clippers. Now, this one is one of the more lopsided matchups we've seen this year with the minus 3.5 point spread in favor of the Clippers. So we got to be a little bit concerned that this one goes off the rails, but it's the NBA. There's not like huge disparities in talent. For Oklahoma City, Horford continues to be out. So Isaiah Roby is most likely going to get another start, but he's not the most exciting fantasy player. Where Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Darius Bazley are two up-and-coming rookies, but this is a very tough matchup. Do you see yourself landing on any Thunder tonight?
I hope not. I mean, on the one hand, the pricing's appealing, and if this were a smaller slate, it's the kind of team that I would be pretty excited to attack and just hope that this game stays close. Because if it does, you have Bazley at sub 5K, you have Roby getting the start, you have Dort at 5K, Diallo's salary's back down to 4,100. Like all these guys are for the most part priced basically for a game that is going to get blown out. So if the game is close and you get full run from these guys, they end up being a little bit underpriced. But the problem is just that on a slate this big, like being a little bit underpriced still probably doesn't get it done. And you're still taking on that risk of a tough matchup against the Clippers, a 103 implied total being, the biggest dog on the slate, all that stuff working against them. So I'm not really super interested in this team. I know you mentioned before the show, Gilgeous-Alexander being low owned. He's the kind of guy that is really interesting in tournaments normally just because he's capable of giving you those terrible games when his team gets blown out. But if this game is close, you probably got a game where Gilgeous-Alexander is dropping 50 plus fantasy points at low ownership. So there is some appeal there, but it just still, for me, comes back to like, even just quickly looking at the ownership projections, in that same range, you have DeMar DeRozan, you have Chris Paul, you have so many other guys that are just in better situations and can give you similar outcomes, low frequency, high ceiling guys. So not a whole lot that I really am that interested in here.
Definitely. I didn't see you mention that it's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander revenge game. So thank you for W German in the chat. A little bit of an extra incentive to play him just for fun. But yeah, man, ever since he left the Clippers, he's really kind of been blooming. Now on the Clippers side, it's very tough to get to these guys when everyone's healthy. So hopefully one of these guys can pick up an injury. But until then, I might just lay low, not really play Paul George or Kawhi Leonard. Do you see any way to get to them?
Not really. And it's not to say I don't like Leonard or George. Obviously I do. They're both averaging around 34 minutes per game. They both average about 1.3 DraftKings points per minute. All that's great. But they're not that much less expensive than James Harden, Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic. Like basically you have to sacrifice one player in your lineup. Like you have to go from one mid-range guy to a value guy to get up to a Jokic or a Doncic or a Harden. They're more expensive than Kyrie. They're more expensive than a lot of these other players that we've liked. So it kind of just ends up being a really awkward price point where it's just tough to get to them. But the fact that they're both healthy also just takes so much value away from the rest of the Clippers. Plus you had Lou Williams return last game. So that hurts Patrick Beverley. It hurts Marcus Morris. It's just a really gross spot, I think.
Yeah, I agree. We did get a starting lineup for the Rockets tonight. We got Eric Gordon in the starting lineup as well as Jae'Sean Tate, Cousins, what we were hoping for, Oladipo and Tucker. So no surprises, but kind of encouraging us for the guys we were already suggesting. And guys, I was just joking about the injury thing. That I hope it was clear. All right, Denver at Phoenix. Denver, we got Michael Porter Jr. coming back from the COVID list. He missed a few games reconditioning, so I'm not expecting him to be back to a full 30 minutes a night. He's not particularly cheap anyway, but it's hard to really find any value on this team outside of Jokic because he's the lead assist guy, the lead rebounder, and the lead scorer. So I don't really see a ton here, but I do kind of like Jokic as a pivot away from Cousins. Now, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I like him as a pivot away or just in play or alongside him, obviously on DraftKings. But yeah, there's no reason not to like Jokic here. I mean, it's not a Phoenix front court that I expect to really slow him down. He's averaging 35 minutes per game this season. He's been one of the best per minute fantasy producers in the league. He's doing everything on this team. So one thing like in tournaments, when you have kind of a congested top end of talent, it's normally pretty appealing to go to the low owned pieces of it. And right now, Jokic only projected for 5% ownership, in large part because of the position that he plays. So if you can get him in the lineups, by all means, you can feel pretty confident about it.
Nice. Yeah, I think that he could go a bit under the radar given everyone's spending that center spot on Cousins. Now on the Phoenix side, got some interesting moves by the Suns. They're starting Cameron Johnson over Jay Crowder, and I'm assuming that's going to continue indefinitely. So he saw 28 minutes last game. Not a high points per minute guy, but someone that they're definitely prioritizing on the Suns. And what have you made of him starting so far?
Yeah, I mean, he's for the season, he's like 0.9 fantasy points per minute, which is nice. He's one of their young, talented guys, which I always like when trying to gauge sort of like how volatile their minutes are. They have every incentive to let him play as long as he's playing relatively well, which is nice. And him starting just makes it a little bit easier for him to get more minutes than it is coming off the bench. So I assume you're getting upper 20s in minutes from him. He's still pretty cheap. It's just a guy where he fills out lineups nicely, I think, especially because he's small forward eligible. It's not like a DeMarcus Cousins type value where I'm starting my lineup by putting Cousins in. But if I get a bunch of guys in my lineup that I like and I need a $4,400 forward, I think Cameron Johnson's a good value.
Nice. Yeah, it's pretty tough to find the really good values aside from Cousins today. So he could be a guy to think about if you need someone cheap. Now, the rest of the team, it's tough because they don't really have an alpha this year with Devin Booker playing alongside Chris Paul. We've seen his usage be about the same as last year, but the assists have taken a big hit. So he's a little harder to count on for those huge performances this year. For Chris Paul, he's getting more assists than he did with Harden, but the usage is pretty low. So it's like an interesting dichotomy there. Do you find any value on the Suns team aside from Cameron Johnson?
I kind of like the salary on Paul. He's 6,900 on FanDuel. He's 7,200 on DraftKings. It's just like a little bit cheaper than a lot of these like 8K guards we talked about. And I think there's going to be some builds where that salary is really useful. And he's not getting much ownership either, which is really nice when you talk about someone like Chris Paul, because the biggest issue with him is that he doesn't play as many minutes as a lot of the other 7 to 8K guys. So if he's popular, it's really easy for him to just kind of disappoint and underwhelm. But when he's not popular, you're getting that upside at pretty low risk, given the low ownership. So, he's actually averaged more fantasy points per minute than Booker this year. And I think that the salary is just pretty good at low ownership for him.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's an interesting play. And then Ayton at center, I mean, I guess we're starting to think more about the night slate guys here because probably not going to get to him on the main slate, but he had a little bit of a slow start to the year. What have you seen recently?
So the one thing I like with Ayton, so for one, his production's gone up a little bit, which I think was to be expected. Like there was no reason to think he was going to drop off from a production standpoint as much as he did early in the season. But he's getting more minutes now too, which is nice. And I think that coincides with Dario Saric being out. We had seen it kind of just be a situation where he has a pretty decent backup in Saric that's going to get enough minutes to impact Ayton. Now you have Jalen Smith returning, but Saric still out. I'm expecting Smith to replace Kaminsky in the rotation, but I don't think Smith is going to really steal minutes from Ayton. So I think there's a pretty good chance you get 34 or 35 minutes from Ayton, which on a lot of slates would make me like him. But, not only have we talked about the expensive centers and DeMarcus Cousins, I love Clint Capela on this slate. I really like, we talked about Vooch, obviously. There's just so many centers at every price point that it's still really tough to get much Ayton.
Yeah, I agree. A little bit tough. So we have been informed by our producer Jordan Klein that we are getting way too high in pace for our show here, so we got to slow things down. And we've really neglected the talk of the town in NBA DFS, which is Top Shot. So, Adam, have you been checking out their site? Got any cool cats?
Yeah, didn't get any of the cool cats earlier, but yeah, I've been messing around with it. Still not completely sure how I feel about it all in general, but did sell. I had bought a rare Kelly Oubre a couple of nights ago, sold that for double my money, so feeling pretty good.
Wow, that's a pretty good return. One of my strategies is I'm locked out from the site right now because the ID check is just like, and their support is taking forever. But I would think about buying some Cousins moments because if he has a big game tomorrow or tonight, I think like he's gonna have the opportunity. Maybe like that'll increase the demand. Everyone's will be like, "Oh shoot, it's Cousins season." What do you
There's
think of that
definitely been some
strategy?
overlap there. I think just because there's so many DFS players involved in it right now, like that's such a large percentage of the market where it's not like long-term value changes because DeMarcus Cousins plays well tonight, but like Kevin Porter Jr., I think his cards like doubled as soon as he got traded to the Rockets, basically. There's been a lot of just like somebody has a good game and then their card prices go up immediately.
Yeah, and it's all like kind of driven by demand, like in speculation. So it doesn't have to be like how good a player actually is. It's very intriguing. All right, let's go to the last game here. New York at Sacramento. Now, Alec Burks came back last night from a long absence and played like insane minutes. I don't know about you, but I was kind of hoping for some quickly minutes in that short slate, but then Alfred Payton got all of the minutes literally. So a little disappointed there. Now on a 11 game slate, definitely not as appealing, but Julius Randle has been a top talent this season, really upping his game in the assist category, particularly. But that's been down a little bit the last few. So do you think that was just a flash in the pan, or do you think Julius Randle is going to keep getting those dimes?
I think he'll still keep getting them. I mean, probably not to the rate that he was getting early in the season, but just because of the type of player he is, I think that they'll still be there for him. Plus, he's still playing huge minutes, so he's just going to accumulate stats anyway. More the Knicks are getting more ball handlers back, which is just going to have an impact on that. You would expect. Obviously, you have Peyton and quickly splitting the point guard minutes, but now you have Burks back taking minutes from Reggie Bullock, who Burks is another guy that's capable of picking up some assists. So I don't think that we get back to early season assist numbers from Randall, but I do still think he's someone that's going to give you enough assists on a night-to-night basis to be valuable.
Nice. Yeah, he's been impressive this year, and the minutes have been there. I mean, it's a different coach, so we should expect a lot of different things from the Knicks this year. But one thing has been Obi Toppin. Toppin is their first round draft pick this year. He plays the same position as Randall. So I'm kind of wondering, like, does that affect his minutes? And then with RJ Barrett, the guards have gotten a little bit more crowded with Burks coming back, as well as they're trying to get Knox and quickly minutes. So have the Knicks kind of fallen a tier for you as far as fantasy with all these guys coming back?
Not too much, at least not yet, just because for one, Tom Thibodeau just runs his starters into the ground every year. But for two, the way they're running their rotations, at least right now, you're kind of getting direct backups, which always makes me feel a little bit better about guys' minutes, or at least it makes it more clear cut. Like Alfred Payton and Emmanuel Quickly are playing 48 minutes at point guard. In games where Payton plays poorly and Quickly plays well, Quickly will get more minutes, which means that he's someone that we can attack on those short slates like last night and just hope that we're on the right side of variance. Last night we weren't. But then you also saw 48 minutes split, 17 minutes going to Reggie Bullock, 31 going to Alec Burks. It's not like you had a lot of crossover where like Burks is stealing minutes from Quickly or stealing minutes from Peyton. So like that makes me feel a little bit better. Like if I roster Alec Burks, I just need him to outplay Reggie Bullock. I feel pretty good about that happening. And then kind of the same thing where like Obi Toppin's just backing up Julius Randle. Kevin Knox basically is backing up RJ Barrett based on last night's rotation. So it right now at least the rotations seem pretty much like I feel pretty confident in rostering what I think are the best players and the guys that Thibodeau tends to give minutes to. Like I'm okay going to Burke still. I still like going to Randall. I still think Barrett plays a lot of minutes.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about this Reggie Bullock slander, but Alec Burks could be pretty interesting on a late slate. Just because if he goes back to getting 28 and a half minutes a game like he has this season, a little bit cheap. Yeah. And Sacramento on the defensive end is pretty bad. Now they got.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't know that it was possible for a team to allow 5 points more per 100 possessions than the Wizards, but the Kings are managing to do it.
We got some breaking news here. Darius Garland is in today. Now, I don't know if we can count on him for full minutes, but it was a shoulder injury. So that does make me feel a little bit better that he could see kind of the 30 but it makes it I mean, I wouldn't recommend going to guys like Chetty Osman now, even though he had a big game last game. Instant reaction for Garland being in.
It just makes me more confident in not rostering guys from Cleveland.
Nice. Yeah, that's probably the takeaway. And Dylan Windler is available. I don't know if he'll be in the rotation though. All right. On the Sacramento side, very young team, got a lot of talenting younger guys. So Marvin Bagley's probably the number one guy. Drafted over Luka. He's seen his responsibilities increase in the last few games where one game he played about 35 minutes, and then the last game he played 29. Those are both higher than his season average of 26. So with that in mind, I think he might be a little bit underpriced, being a pretty good permanent guy. Do you feel confident that Bagley will continue to get some extra burn?
I don't want to say confident because Luke Walton does weird stuff all the time, but he should. And I do think he's a little bit underpriced. Like his salary hasn't caught up to him now being on the floor to close out 3 straight games. It is a pretty brutal matchup against the Knicks. The Knicks play at the slowest pace in the league. They've also been the 3rd most efficient defense. So it's just kind of a grinding style that the Knicks play. And I think it's tough to really trust guys going up against them. But Bagley has averaged about a fantasy point per minute this year, and he is still pretty cheap. So, he's the kind of guy where if he lands in some lineups, I'm fine with it. I think that there's a little bit of value there. Holmes, I would say the same thing, except again, he's a center. So you're not just talking about how Rashawn Holmes performs relative to his salary. You're talking about how he performs relative to like Cousins and Jokic and Embiid. So it gets a lot tougher.
All right, guys, we got the news we were waiting for. Kyle Lowry's out tonight. So I have to believe that this is going to make a big difference for Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet. And then off the bench, Norman Powell's probably going to start. And then Terrence Davis may be off the bench, but their bench has been so difficult to predict this year. So Powell, VanVleet, and Siakam all look like core plays now. What's your reaction?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mentioned earlier VanVleet in the games he had played without Lowry since last year, 1.17 DraftKings points per minute. We know he plays huge minutes. Siakam, 1.19 DraftKings points per minute in those games. In the games he played with Lowry, it was 1.14. So a little bit of a bump there. And then Powell, in the starting lineup, just announced as well, 30.8 minutes per game in his start since last season, averaging just shy of a fantasy point per minute. He's one of these guys where he's not going to get a ton of usage playing with Siakam and playing with Lowry, but he's going to do enough while he's on the floor to typically produce at a high enough rate to pay off his salary. So bumps for all of those guys. I think it's a bump for OG Anunoby as well. He should get more minutes at the 4 potentially, but that's not nearly as important as the rest of the stuff.
Nice. Yeah. So VanVleet and Powell, as well as Siakam, all look like very solid plays now. What about the other Raptors? Like, do you see Boucher maybe seeing some minutes at the 5 with Siakam not playing as much center, or like Terrence Davis? He had a big game off the bench last time, but he's gotten a lot of DNP CDs. So we definitely need some cheapies. I just don't know if those are the right ones.
Yeah, I mean, Terrence Davis played well and actually closed the last game. So if you were going to take a flyer on one of the cheap Toronto guys and basically hope to guess right, I think it would be Davis. I misspoke a minute ago, though. I got mixed up who was out. I don't think Anunoby plays more minutes at the 4. I think that it could benefit Boucher, though, because, like, for example, if you like the Hawks the other day when all of their wing guys were out, they had to play John Collins at the 4 more, and that led to them changing up their center rotation a little bit. I think you could potentially see the same thing here where they could go with like the same closing lineup as they did the other night with Terrence Davis. They could go with they could go with Davis, but like I don't think Aaron Baines is going to close, and so you're going to have to go with either Siakam or Boucher at the 5. Now I think there's a pretty good chance that Boucher is getting back to his like 28 to 30 minutes.
We got some other breaking news here. Tyler Hero is also out. So last game we saw Gabe Vincent get the start, but Kendrick Nunn played 34 minutes off the bench and had a huge fantasy game. Goran Dragic, he had a little bit of an off game last game. I think he just hit value or something, but he also could stand the benefit with Hero out. Now, do these guys become huge priorities for you?
$3,300 Gabe Vincent's going to be popular and make or break the slate. That's going to be a ton of fun. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point per dollar guy in Vincent, assuming he gets like 28 minutes again. He's not very productive, especially when he's playing with Dragic and playing with Adebayo. He's not going to be getting a ton of shots up you wouldn't expect. None is, a deeper tournament option. Like if he plays well, we know he can get 30 plus minutes again, and he can, outproduce $5,400. There's just a lot more risk there. Dragic, especially on FanDuel at 5,200, I think becomes a really good play now with Hero out.
Yeah, I'd say Dragic is probably the priority here based on the salaries. And although Gabe Vincent he's not a great fantasy point per minute producer, I'm kind of intrigued because there is such of a lack of options below 4K tonight. Do you think it's worth just putting him in even knowing that he'd be popular just because he fits?
I think a lot for me will come down in tournaments, at least on him to ownership, because I think the chances of him breaking the slate, in terms of raw points, are pretty low. And I can just go up to, some other guys that have a little bit higher ceiling. But if he's not going to be that popular, we do know that we got the value with Norman Powell as well. So maybe that does take some ownership away from Vincent. It would be a guy that you can use for that extra $1,000 and hope for the best. So I think it's just kind of a situation where I want to do the opposite of what the field's doing with Vincent.
Nice. Just updated the projections, about to run another ownership update. It's crazy that we're getting this news right before the hour where we build lineups. This is perfect.
Yeah, I wish we had this kind of timing all the time.
Yeah. Let's close out the Sacramento Kings because we didn't talk about all of them. Richaun Holmes seems to get anywhere between 26 and 36 minutes on any given night. So I feel like he's pretty intriguing, but the price and position is a little tough. Harrison Barnes, he gets the minutes, but per minute production is a little bit weak. Do you see anyone else on the Kings to target tonight?
Not really. De'Aaron Fox is $1,000 less on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings, which of course is the case for a lot of guys normally. But assuming this game's competitive, you're probably getting mid-30s in minutes from Fox. He's averaged 1.2 DraftKings points per minute this year. The problem again is just the Knicks play at such a slow pace, and they're such a good defensive team that it's tough to really have a lot of success against them, especially on a slate with this many good plays. So there's nothing I'm prioritizing here. If I land on some Fox or some Bagley, I think it's fine. But I typically would just rather roster guys from a different team.
Wow, man, I'm having to do a double take here where you're saying the Knicks are one of the best defensive teams. Is that true this year? That's insane.
Yeah, slowest team in the league and the third most efficient defense.
Wow. All right. So just to give you guys some numbers on my projections, I have the value over 5x. VanVleet, Powell, and Siakam are now the second, third, and fourth values of the night, and Terrence Davis is fifth. So Dragic is sixth. So basically all the top plays are the ones that just came in the last few minutes here. So make sure to start over from scratch if you already have some lineups, because I don't think if you fade these guys, it'll be a good strategy. But we got Spags and Terry coming up right after us to help you guys go all the way up to lock, figure out who to put in your lineups and who to fade. Guys, thanks a lot for tuning into the deeper dive. Stay tuned. We got another hour going on after this. And by the way, do not look at the chat because there's a lot of fake news here. So, all right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for Spags and Terry. Thanks. There it goes.
How about now? All right, cool. A little more? Good? Up a little.
Use that news like 15 minutes earlier. It would have been sick.
Yeah, that would have been perfect. I was just all set. I was sitting here like, oh man, I can even run a DraftKings crunch to see how that comes together. And then the whole world caved in on itself.
Yeah, hold on. Let me just get this Excel spreadsheet open and then I'll be ready to go. Sorry. All right.
Yeah, if I crash the entire stream when I try and run Solver again, I'm sorry.
All right, I just need to get my Fantasy Cruncher import. Something usable. All right, I'm good to go, Jordan. You can start it up. What is up, everyone? You might hear it on the hot mics, but we are figuring things out on the fly, and that's the most fun shows for you guys, where there is a little bit of an edge to discuss, and we will take you through all the injuries, all the plays you need to know on today's NBA DFS slate. I'm Chris Spags, joined by my Friday pal, a man who's going to give you a lot of insight, especially from the Awesemo Boom Bust tool, a great weapon in the arsenal of any player who's got an Awesemo Plus membership. He's Terry McBride. How you doing, Terry?
We're pretty good, pal. Like we were just talking about, it was a lot calmer just a couple minutes ago before some of this news broke. It was good to get it, early, in general for lock, but for our purposes, right before coming on the show, it's a little bit chaotic. So just trying to get some stuff updated in my spreadsheet here so we can talk through all these different changes.
Yeah, there is a lot going on here. As you guys heard Alex and Adam just talk about, we do have no Kyle Lowry, no Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero did miss last game, so it's going to be a situation, I guess, we're maybe not totally unprepared for, but Kyle Lowry, definitely a curveball today. But one site in which there are no curveballs because of their multiplier format, it's over at Super Draft, and they're one of our presenting sponsors here, doing a lot of great stuff to help us, A, put this channel on, and B, to help you guys find a little more money out there. Super Draft, one of the sites here that not quite targeted as much by the super sharp shark players out there. And that's where your advantage comes in, along with their multiplier format, where you could pick any players you want. Any guy on there, you could play a lineup with Giannis, you could play a lineup with LeBron, you could play a lineup with Luka, all in there. The issue is just that those guys aren't going to have a high multiplier, whereas a guy today, like Jeremy Grant, like Fred VanVleet, those guys, the 1.6x, 1.4x multiplier on Super Draft, those are the big value plays. So that's how it works over at Super Draft. Go play it at superdraft.io or download Super Draft in the App Store and really support that with your dollar, because it's one way you're going to find a lot easier pathway to win these big GPPs. So play over at Super Draft, superdraft.io, or download Super Draft in the App Store. And make sure you go to awesemo.com/join for all the data as well. It's going to be a very important part of the process on a night like this. I know for me, I pull in the Awesemo stat lines, I pull in the projections, I pull in the Boom Bust tool, and I just use it to put together my lineups on the show, hopefully make them less disastrous than they would be while having to talk to all of you guys and keep things flowing. So it's really going to be great for you. Go to awesemo.com/join. And make sure you guys hit the like button right now as well for the deeper dive before us. Alex and Adam giving you guys all their best takes and all the late breaking news they got. But also hit that like button, because if you guys get to 1,000 likes at the halfway point of the show for free, I'll give you guys the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel, and also helps us get seen by more people. So real win-win for both you watching this show and for us as a channel here on Awesemo. So please hit that like button now, get us to 1,000, and we'll feel really good about it and give you guys the top 5 owned plays at the halfway point of the show. But Terry, we just got all this news, and I think Fred VanVleet, the guy is going to jump out, I think, for a lot of people. Alex mentioned Pascal Siakam, but for the injuries that we just got, we'll talk about the Rockets and some of their absences later. But for this Raptors lineup, Terry, how are you feeling about the boost that these guys should get? And is anybody becoming a near must play for you because of there being no Kyle Lowry?
Yeah, I tell you what, I liked Freddie VanVleet when I wrote up my column this afternoon, and I think this just gives him, an even bigger shot in the arm from what we were expecting. So I really like getting to him on both sites, but particularly I think on FanDuel, he's going to be in a lot of my lineups in this next version of my crunch. On DK, he's slightly less necessary. The optimal lineup percentage drops on the Boom Bust tool that you mentioned a little bit as compared to FanDuel. You can roster, different guys at different positions over there. There's more position flexibility, more general change that you can make on the slate. And he's not at like a crazy value price. 7,800 is around, where he should be priced for Fred VanVleet, but it's a big opportunity. Should see an uptick in minutes, should see an uptick in usage with Lowry out. So definitely getting a ton of him. I think there should be a little bit of a boost to like a Norm Powell now, expecting to get like 33 minutes in there. He might be a little bit relevant. Not getting massive numbers. I might have missed a update in this most recent version of the Boom Bust, so I'll have to check that. But I think he gets a little bit more relevant now. He's going to be seeing a lot of minutes. And then I think Boucher is still kind of a question mark in that lineup, just given that we know Siakam was questionable coming in. He's going to play, going to give it a go. But if he doesn't get a full complement of minutes, we might see Boucher get a couple extra minutes beyond the 29 we have him projected for, which would kind of inject him more into the conversation. So lots of moving parts with Toronto now.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing here is because of there being no Kyle Lowry in the mix. And I guess, for really anybody who's newer with DFS, when you have a guy who dominates the ball, who picks up a good amount of usage, a good amount of assists on the year, Kyle Lowry, actually, now he's off my screen. Now, here we go. He's on the year, a 22% usage rate guy. The assist rate still about 30%. So there's a lot of opportunity here, both in terms of shot creation and just those extra possessions opened up. And Fred VanVleet should be the big beneficiary that I'm going to get to. But really anybody on Toronto, I think you can get to today just because there is the opening of opportunity here. Lowry, just a guy who has a lot of minutes. And the obvious plays, as Terry just mentioned, Norman Powell, certainly a value consideration. But really anybody in the mix here, Terrence Davis, another guy that Adam just mentioned, could end up maybe in a closing group, does bring a little more defense, maybe a little better matchup for a team like Miami. I think really any of these guys you're getting to with your optimizers, hopefully Fantasy Cruncher, which of course you can get with an Awesemo membership. I think that's sort of what I would feel about Toronto here, just because Lowry leaves such a big hole. What about the Miami side, Terry, where no Tyler Hero? We've seen this equation, as I mentioned up top before. Gabe Vincent picked up the start last time. Goran Dragic, a bit of a disappointment. Kendrick Nunn came in and really dominated the ball in a way I think a lot of people wouldn't have expected. So what are you getting out of Miami's side, if anything? Does anybody get a big jump up in ownership for you?
Yeah, to me, that one's Dragic again. I had a pretty big share of him the other day, and it was a letdown game, but I think he still hit like the 27-point mark, which it's not a ceiling score by any means, but for the salary, it's not going to totally murder you. And I think that's around that was kind of a floor game for the opportunity. I don't think he's going to put that game up. I think he exceeds that. We've got him projected beyond that, and I think the projection might even be a little bit low for the potential of the opportunity. I think Alex has a somewhat conservative minutes projection on there. So I think we could potentially get a little bit more out of Dragic even. So I like going there, and it's kind of play that I really like getting to when people get burnt by a guy just the other day. I think it might keep some people from, being a little bit reluctant to click on him. So give me some Dragic there. It's definitely going to, get Gabe Vincent probably involved again. So we'll see a little bit of him, but he had that one big game, but generally 0.71 fantasy points per minute this year. He's going to probably see, 26 to 28 minutes, somewhere in that range. So he's fine for 3,800, but I don't think he's got that ceiling type score, even at that price, where he's going to be a mandatory value piece tonight. So I don't think we need Gabe Vincent, at least not yet. So I think Dragic is the play there. And then definitely Bam has been in play for me for, a decent part of the day. And I think he remains in play.
Yeah, I'm with you on Dragic. I think too, for not having Kyle Lowry in there, that's one less, high quality defender who I think, unfortunately didn't watch all of that game, but for what I saw, I do think a part of it, we don't worry too much about individual matchups, but having Lowry in the mix can be a situation where a guy like Dragic doesn't force the usage as much as he does normally. And on the year, when there's no Butler, when there's no Hero, we see Dragic normally be around a 30% usage rate guy with an assist rate upwards of, 35 to 40%, depending on where you're looking. So to me, that's sort of the main reason why why Dragic is worth going back to. And if you are a person who worries about those defensive matchups, I think just not having Lowry in the mix is going to make things look a little bit easier for Dragic today. The other big injury spot that we need to talk about, and this is one that we knew in advance, so this is one that I've been prepared for all day, and I'm really curious where you land with it, Terry, because Houston, obviously James Harden still out of town, John Wall not coming back today. We also have Christian Wood added to the not playing list here for Houston, which is getting bigger by the day. He's expected to be out at least this game, probably a couple more depending upon how that goes. And Victor Oladipo and his limited run playing alongside Christian Wood, who's been another high usage guy. Oladipo's had about a 38% assist rate or a 38% usage rate with an assist rate upwards of 45%. Actually had to mark him down to the mid 30s just to make it make sense. But people are going to go to DeMarcus Cousins. That's the obvious value. I think Oladipo and Cousins are both two of the stronger plays on the slate. Oladipo not getting the ownership. Terry, you tell me, how do you feel about Oladipo? And take me through your Cousins take as well, because I know there's some doubters in the chat for whatever reason of DeMarcus Cousins.
We'll get to that one. Let's start with Oladipo. Nobody's talking to you. That was Alexa beeping behind me. Anyway, going to
put her in her place. Show just you got to smack Alexa around on a stream, Terry. It's okay. Go ahead, take the freedom.
So Oladipo, you mentioned it. He saw, we were a little bit concerned where the usage was going to land when he came to Houston, and we saw it, he got a significant amount of usage in the first couple games, so not worried about that at all. Definitely think he's going to be in play, and we've got a great projection on him. Should see a full complement of minutes in that starting lineup, and there's not really a lot of other options to go to in what the outside of Boogie, of course, other than kicking it out to Eric Gordon. I don't really love most of the other options offensively, so I think it's going to be an all-you-can-eat kind of a night for both Oladipo and Cousins, and Gordon to some degree. I like the Oladipo play just going by the boom bust a little bit better over on DraftKings. You're paying a little bit less for him, $8,000 as compared to $8,500, and you get the positional flexibility from point guard to shooting guard. Goes up a little bit in the optimal lineup appearance rate, right around level ownership, and solid boom bust score. So definitely love muscling up a little bit on the Oladipo play. As far as Boogie, I spent part of the afternoon outside trying to make new friends in a COVID kind of environment, just so I could get another 150 lineups to put Boogie into. I'm going to have 100% of Boogie in my FanDuel lineups tonight. I would have 100% Boogie in DraftKings lineups as well.
I guess so that's interesting. So you're going all in on Cousins, and I'm with you. I think depending on how my final sorting looks, I've been getting around 80 to 100% Cousins, 80 to 100% Oladipo today. Two guys, again, large usage players out of that lineup. Those possessions have to go somewhere, and they also have to go somewhere against the Detroit team, who, while they play a little slow, still a 111 defensive efficiency rating. They really don't defend anybody too well. So really anybody who's going to get looks here is going to have an opportunity. But I feel like let's give the logic, Terry, and why you would go 100% Cousins here. And I guess also why, if there are any thoughts on how you would pivot, you're not doing that. And I think it's important for us to say, like, we're probably not pivoting off Cousins a lot today, but if you were to do that thought exercise, where would you want to go and how would you want to be different?
Yeah, sure. So we're talking entirely about price and opportunity for, this guy's role in the offense, right? When you get a player like Boogie Cousins, Wood is coming. Christian Wood is a very high usage player at the power forward spot that he would have to play next to get any kind of production. Wood's not going to be in the lineup today. All that run is going to go to Boogie as far as where the usage is going, and he's going to see an uptick in minutes. He's been getting 18-ish minutes, 20 minutes. We're going to see him get up to 24, 26, 28 minutes would be a smash, and he's a 1.36 fantasy point producer per minute producer this year. So he crushes when he gets opportunity. All he needs is playing time. It's a no-brainer of a play. He costs $4,500 at the center spot on FanDuel, $44 at the center spot on DraftKings. There's just no comparable play on the board at any position. If you look at the DraftKings board, his optimal lineup appearance rate at the position is 58.1. So almost 60% of the time, he's going to be in the optimal DraftKings lineup, no matter how the other chips fall. The next highest guy at the center spot, this doesn't have the, okay, it does, it looks like Nikola Vucevic at 12.6%. That's a gulf of difference. And you can roster both of them on DK. Over on FanDuel, 42.6% of the optimal lineups. It's fallen a little bit since earlier this afternoon when it was above 50. There's been a little bit of disbursement of value. DeAndre Jordan comes up now. DeAndre is the second ranked, but he's at 8.6%. So you're talking about one guy with a concentration of almost 50% of the optimal lineups versus trying to throw a dart and hit one of these other center plays. So yeah, there are some other upside plays. There's some, Joel Embiid is there, Nikola Jokic is there, Vooch is there, Drummond is there, but nobody looks like DeMarcus Cousins does on this slate. He's drawing a tremendous amount of ownership. I could not get him out of crunches. I could not get him out of my filtering process, regardless of how I changed anything. So I have to go with it.
No, I think that's a good way to spell it out there. And I think, we talk a lot about value, and, sometimes I know Josh talked about it and certainly sold me on the concept a little more with NFL and NBA, which is, if you get a guy who's near minimum price, it's really about that guy is not going to be the one that kills you. Obviously, it'd be great if he has an outlier day, like a guy like a Gabe Vincent did earlier in the year, maybe not so much so today. But I think that's sort of the situation with Cousins, where you're getting somebody who's cheap, who allows you to get to the Oladipos, to get to a Jeremy Grant. If you really believed in Capela, which I think we can talk about as well, I'm not quite as sold on his ceiling from the other day. I think that was a bit of a result of some of the absences in that Hawks lineup. But overall, I think Cousins, he's opening up a lot of things, and there's a really high possibility that if he is productive per minute, he's still going to give you a gigantic score for his own. So I think it's really a double-pronged reason why you get to Cousins. And I think for all the people who question it out there, it could easily go south. Cousins, honestly, I think looking a little bit gimpy lately with the ankle issues, looking maybe a little bit sluggish. Alex mentioned on the deeper dive too, but at the same token, he's 4,400 and he's easily got a 40-point ceiling, especially if he sees, more than 23 minutes you see normally.
Yeah, and even if he comes out and gives us just an okay performance, just an average point per minute kind of a performance, to your point, at those prices, it's not about what he's going to do even. It's about all those other lanes of construction that it opens up at every other position for you, particularly when you can roster several different stars. And we do have a lot of available stars on this slate who are in very playable spots. On the FanDuel side of things, which is where my brain is right now, Harden, Sabonis, I can get to plenty of Luka. I can get to plenty of Paul George. So there's just a lot of good players. Oladipo is another guy that we've mentioned already. There's just so many guys that he allows you to access that if you slot a Jokic into the center spot, you're cutting off your access to most of those guys, or at least to rostering multiple ones of those guys for not that big a delta in the most likely of outcomes at the center spot.
Yeah, I'm with you on it. And it's really also thinking about Christian Wood, how he's been great this year. Cousins is not, going to be the same player as Wood. He's not going to be bringing the ball up court like Wood does. He's not going to be playing kind of a bootleg Giannis role, but still Wood shoots threes. Wood gets rebounds. Wood also has had about a 27% usage rate since Oladipo's been in the lineup. So to me, that's the logic here. But people worrying about ejections. You really can't worry about a guy getting ejected, even if it is Boogie.
I wrote about that in the column this afternoon. It came up in Slack. He's been ejected. Yeah, he's the second all-time leader in his career for ejections, with 15 behind Rasheed Wallace's 29. That's 15 in 575 career games, I think it was. That's like 2% of his games, 2.6% of his games. It's not something to worry about. It's also not something that's at all projectable or quantifiable. We cannot put that into projections. You have to ignore it. Same with the technical fouls issue. I mean, it's just not a thing that we need to concern ourselves about. Pay attention to the math.
Yeah, I think that's it. And again, Alex talked about it in the last show. If you want to buy a top shot, maybe a DeMarcus Cousins or really if there's a technical foul, DeMarcus Cousins. I
was wondering how long it would take us to get into top shots. I love that it came up on the previous show.
Look, I feel like we just got to lean into it. I'm not doing the top shot marketplace, but really, if you are going to do it for NBA, it's probably the time to do it now. And because of the fluctuations correlating a lot with DFS, I think we're not a top shot show. But if you want to go buy a DeMarcus Cousins or an Oladipo, I actually gave my pal Peter Overzet. I said, hey, he asked who would be a guy who might go off tonight who's not a star, and Oladipo I think also fits that criteria. The Rockets overall, I think the spot against Detroit, not a high over under game, but still one a lot of room to have some opportunity there. Again, guys, make sure you hit that like button. We got about 15 minutes until what's been deemed money time. And Terry, I'm going to tell you something that I learned yesterday, which I feel like is just fun, a fun tangent, even on an 11 game slate. You know that the viewership goes up for money time on YouTube, which is really the highlight of my life, because I feel like an asshole doing it. It started as just a complete shtick that was just a joke. And now we got hard data, and that's what we're all about here at Awesemo. We're all about the data.
So you're telling me people out there are like watching other shows, but setting an alarm for like 6:30 so they can pop in for 2 minutes to check out what color hat you're wearing and enjoy money time and then bail out again?
Yeah,
they're not here for the takes. They're just for the hat. I love it.
I mean, look, it's sometimes a simple change here, and it's really added a lot of value to me. But no, the main thing people are tuning in for is we do give out the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. If you guys get to 1,000 likes, and I think that's been what people have started to check in along with money time. Okay. It's like getting a combo meal at your favorite fast food place. You're getting a little bit of everything here. I'm actually checking through our ownership now, and who can run the most without getting tired tonight, as Elusive Smoke asking. Another question from Scoops Coates asking, what's the most Raptors you'd play in a DK lineup? I think that's a fair one to ask. For me, I feel like 3 is probably the cap.
3 is generally where I'll cap anything, unless it's like a 2-game slate, 3-game slate. But on a full slate, I'm not usually going more than 3 of any team, unless there's ridiculous value combinations.
All right, and I'm actually just going through the ownership now because I sort of want to get a better read with everything changing around in terms of the ownership. And let's see, top owned plays. Really not a lot of concentration of chalk so far. I guess one guy who is worth mentioning because maybe people view him as a value-ish play, but I'm surprised that this guy's at 20% on a slate of this size. But Marvin Bagley looking very chalky against the Knicks. Knicks on a back-to-back. Also, giving up a lot of shots at the rim, so maybe some reason to go to Bagley. But would you consider him a core play on the slate of this size, knowing that a large portion of the field is going to be there?
I was getting to some of them in the previous crunch. I'm curious to see what it does to him in this next run. It's not a spot I love. Like if I was hand building or, just thinking the slate through that way without really looking through some of Alex's numbers and just how my stuff came up alongside that, I wouldn't necessarily have thought of them just because of what I expect the pace to be in that game, just because of how my Knicks are playing defense this year. It feels like it's 1994. The Knicks are the league leaders in defense. It's completely absurd, but Yeah, I just think all that kind of plays against Bagley. So he is drawing, like you said, negative leverage on FanDuel slightly, and pretty significant negative leverage at negative 7.8 over on DK. One of the higher numbers that's not named Boogie Cousins over there. So I think it starts to make sense when you get to that territory on a guy that's not like an explosive value play. He's in 15-ish% of the optimals over on DK. But I think there's other options that you can rotate through those forward spots. So he doesn't seem like necessary chalk. I think he is fine. If I got him around the field, I'd be good with it. A little below, I'd be good with it. A little above, I'd probably be all right with it.
I mean, honestly, I wouldn't hate the idea of going to Kelly Olynyk over him, who I actually think projects a little better to me, does get some more assist upside, does get some more usage because there being no Tyler Hero, no Jimmy Butler. But I don't have an issue with Bagley, but I just feel like when you see a guy who's 20% owned, and this isn't DeMarcus Cousins, like who is going to be extremely chalky. I mean, and we'll give you guys the exact number in about 10 minutes here if you guys get us to 1,000 likes, but it's not that spot for Bagley. Like he can easily flow, the usage can flow away from him. He can have one of those days where he just shoots in the mid range all day and is terrible. And I think that's sort of the one thing that I would say with a guy like Bagley. He probably, shouldn't be one of the highest owned guys on the slate. Another guy, Terry, who's not that far behind, and I'm curious your thoughts on the Nets. They are going against Cleveland again, who are, held in kind of surprisingly the other day. Actually picked up the win in that game. Now we're getting this matchup again, but we're getting it without Kevin Durant, who's out. And I had to manually make sure I'm getting a good amount of Harden and Kyrie Irving, just because I want to get above the field on these guys, both of them under 20% projected ownership on DK, but still, I would say fairly chalky relative to a slate of this size. But no Durant, I mean, that's a lot of usage coming in out of that lineup, a lot of ball handling, a lot of possessions. And Harden and Kyrie, for whatever people may question about the fit, going against Cleveland, we saw a gigantic total game last time out. And I really think these guys have the ability to ruin the night. So you tell me, how do you feel about the Nets with no Durant?
I can't wait to see how it works on the floor. Very curious to just, watch the two of them without the KD out there and just, see how everything flows for that team. I was getting a ton of Harden. I wasn't getting as much Kyrie in the last run, which I'm curious to see how that comes out again in the wash, after these value changes with Lowry coming off, because I was getting a fair amount of Lowry when I had him in. So I expect that'll probably push KD up a little bit for me. But yeah, I really like both players. I think they're going to be the guys taking all the shots, handling the ball at all times. Maybe they kick it over to Joe Harris for 3. Maybe DeAndre Jordan gets a dunk or 2, but it's going to be the Harden and Irving show all night. So I think we can get to a fair amount of both players, both appearing in a good amount of the optimal lineups, not crushing ownership on either guy. So I think everything is kind of around where it should be. I'll probably push above the field on Harden on FanDuel, only 29% ownership. I can get to 40-ish, somewhere around there, maybe a little higher on a player like Harden if I am feeling it. And 22.4% of the optimal lineups, I can take some of the leverage on that and go the other way and kind of leverage up. So I like to play on Harden over there. He's one of the stars I'll be getting to for sure with all the Boogie Cousins savings.
Are you getting any appreciable amounts of DeAndre Jordan and Jeff Green, two guys who I think project fairly well? Especially, Jeff Green played a ton of minutes in that overtime game, and you'd think he gets a little bit more here just because of the minutes being vacated by Kevin Durant. But Jordan and Jeff Green, I'm willing to go to despite the low usage, just because they do seem to be playing a ton of minutes with the star grouping here, the guys that they seem to want alongside them. I'm more inclined to go there than the Luau Cabarro tier of guys, or even Joe Harris. I think, Terry, you said is pretty astutely, like he can knock down some threes. I think he's fine at his price point, but certainly not a value. But are you getting any other Nets at all in any amount? Like, are you willing to go to Jeff Green in the hopes that he just sees a ton of minutes and kind of lucks into some shots and rebounds?
Green, not quite as much. He's fine. He's around a level play. Looking at FanDuel, looking at same thing on DK. You can kind of move him around to different positions. He's not an extreme value play. The price is fine, but the upside isn't really there. The guy I would prefer in that situation is DeAndre. Better point per minute producer, 0.96 this year, 1.16 last year. So we know DeAndre can get it done. If he sees 28 minutes, I like the upside. If he sees 22 minutes, 24 minutes, I don't know that he gets there for us. But if I was going to any center not named Boogie Cousins, and this happened in, I think it was 6 out of 1,000 lineups that I crunched before the show, I would be DeAndre Jordan. So it was 994 to 6 in favor of Boogie in that crunch. And then when I filtered it, it came up 100% Boogie. But DeAndre is in play on DK. I think he moves around a little bit. Lower percentage of the optimal, 5.8%. But again, you're talking about a slate where there's one guy soaking up a ton of the optimal lineup usage, and a lot of the other center spots are kind of around that level. So I like Boogie. I think he's in play as one of your multiple center plays over on DK.
Are you playing on both sides tonight, or just one more than the other?
Just FanDuel.
Okay, so just FanDuel. Okay, so good. So anybody on FanDuel, I know I'm making you talk a little bit more about DK because that's sort of the native language that I use the most here to try to relate to the largest portion of the audience. But there are some different plays. What was that?
I like flipping back and forth. It's good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's important, though, to point out some of the stuff, some of the changes here that are different. I think we've had a good amount lately of one of our hosts doing DraftKings, one of our hosts doing FanDuel. Is there anybody on FanDuel who you feel like is, more of a sure thing play or you're more confident with? Because Eric Gordon, just looking through the ownership, I think jumps out to me. Also Jaylen Brown, a guy whose usage has been up with these games without Jason Tatum. And I feel like he's due to have a big one. It just doesn't seem to happen. Killed me the other night. But two guys there who jump out in the ownership on FanDuel being a little more valuable. But anybody else, or if you want to talk more about Brown, Eric Gordon, two of the higher owned FanDuel plays, feel free to talk about them. I just want to see if there are any big differences here for FanDuel that we can hit on.
Yeah, Gordon's definitely one of them. Brown is definitely one of them. And then you get to, star level type guys like DeMarcus Sabonis, James Harden, who I talked about before. Luka's right there. At like that mid-tier range, we've got Aaron Gordon is looking like a strong play over there. Some of these guys are, doubled up as good plays over on DK, but they filter up. Excuse me, sorry, spam call. They filter up a little higher. That's supposed to be off. Over on FanDuel with the optimal lineup appearance rate, it comes up a little bit over on that site just by the nature of forcing you to play specific guys at specific spots rather than being able to move guys around. So I think Jaylen Brown is a fantastic play. I think he's going to get, we've seen the uptick in usage. We've seen the uptick in his assist rate and everything. He just hasn't totally come through and put it all together in these games where Tatum's been out. But the opportunity is there, and I think the ceiling is there for him. So definitely can muscle up on some Jaylen Brown. And he's been productive earlier in the season, 1.24 fantasy points per minute so far this year. So he's right there at 7,600. No issues on that. Otto Porter is coming up a little bit, 18%. So basically a little bit more than double the optimal lineup appearance rate on FanDuel as compared to DK. And I think that's pretty much exclusively because of the ability to move other guys into those forward spots on DK, where he's a small forward and the second ranked small forward on FanDuel, which looks like kind of where we're getting some of our mid-tier value on this slate, just in general. You've got Gordon and Porter just both kind of sitting there in the 5K range. And then that lets you get to a lot of the high price plays at the power forward, the shooting guard, and the point guard spot.
Oh, good. Now I got my crunch in here of actually reflecting the Raptors news. So I feel it's all uphill from here, all good news from here that I can only get better. But one big change here. And again, we talked about it earlier, but that Raptors news, very important one. And for me, as a result, I'm getting a lot of Dragic, a lot of Siakam, a lot of Norman Powell as a value play. And also the Heat absence, give me a lot of Kelly Olynyk. So I'm intrigued to see how that goes. But I think I'm getting him as I speculated, as a pivot to Marvin Bagley, it seems. I'm getting a lot of Kelly Olynyk.
That makes sense. I wanted to circle back to that actually real quick because as we were exiting that conversation, we talked about some of the alternative values to the Bagley play. And there are a few good guys. If you go down just a little bit in that same price tier, some of the guys ranked above him, if you sort to the power forward center spots on DK and then start looking just by optimal lineup rate, are a little bit higher priced. So you're kind of thinking that maybe you're priced out of that tier. But if you go down to, you're dropping from a 15.5 optimal lineup appearance rate on Bagley down to a guy like, let's say LaMarcus Aldridge for the same price, who's only coming in at 8%. So you're not taking a gigantic hit. It's, it's halving it basically, but he's not overowned. He's the same price. He's a guy that we know is somewhat trustworthy. He's been down this year in his production, but there's upside there. And I think there's upside there for the money. So there are other guys. Mason Plumlee's in that role. You can put him in the center spot. Lauri Markkanen is, again, another guy at that price tier. Jared Vanderbilt from Minnesota is right there at that price tier. So there are definitely options to get away from that Bagley play.
The Bulls lineup also came out while we were talking here, and Daniel Gafford is starting, confirmed to start for Wendell Carter, who was ruled out before the show. White, Levine, Williams, Markkanen, Gafford is the starting lineup for the Bulls. And Gafford didn't pop up to me with the minutes projection that Awesemo had him in initially. So I think he had him at 18. I don't know if this is going to give Gafford a boost, but how do you feel about Gafford? Because I do think, at 18 minutes, I don't see a ton of value there. But I suppose if he picked up more of the run here from Wendell Carter and does get a boost here in Awesemo's minutes projection, I think he's one of their better value plays. I just don't feel great. I mean, now that we know he's starting, I do think the equation changes.
Yeah, I definitely think it does. I didn't have him in starting minutes in my model here either. I'm going to see if I can get over there and see what it does if I change him from, I think I had him at like 18 also, so maybe bump him to like 26 and see where we get there. That just takes me a second, but I know he was a guy that I kind of was hoping would get a start, and he's produced a little bit in, when he's gotten minutes so far this year. He's 1.02 fantasy points per minute. So he's a guy that, yeah, with that increased usage, I definitely think he could be in play. And he's only 3,500 on FanDuel, 3,100 over on DK. So at that price, he doesn't need to do a lot. He doesn't need a ton of additional run here. So I definitely think Daniel Gafford's going to pop into this next run of this update here.
Also, might be having some issues with the Awesemo server, but we'll keep you guys informed as best we know here. I'm not seeing it loading as well as it could right now. Probably a bit of a server crush. So I guess the main thing you guys should be doing right now is, even if you have an Awesemo Plus membership, smash that like button, because that's the only way you're getting the top 5 owned plays, whether the site works or not. I know, but help us get to 1,000 likes here. We'll give you the less of the top 5 owned plays. We'll give you guys like the top 2 if you don't get to 1,000, but I'll give you guys a minute here to smash that like button immediately. And if you get to 1,000, I'll give you guys the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. And hopefully the site will be up momentarily because I'm sure we're getting smashed because of all the news breaking here. That does tend to lead to a lot of people trying to get some more data fast. Let's see. All right. 800 likes, 200 more, guys. Just get there. Any other spots, Terry, that you want to hit on as sort of a starting point here? Because we've talked about a lot of these different situations with the injuries and all of that, and some of the main guys we're getting so far. But is there any that we haven't hit on yet that you consider to be either core plays or core games that you're trying to force your way to more, or you consider a priority in some way?
A guy that I had in mind to bring up, just to buy a moment of time to think about that question, is that we didn't talk about in the Miami spot is Kendrick Nunn. He was coming up for some people, and it looks like he came up a little bit in the last version of Alex's boom bust here. I'm just flipping back over to Miami. Yeah, he came up a decent amount as far as his raw projection, but it doesn't look like it's really going to put him into a lot of my lineups. I'm curious, are you getting to any of him? Was that something that was coming up for you? Because I don't think the peripheral numbers are there, and the price is kind of high, especially on FanDuel, is 6,200.
I'm sorry, who were you asking about? I missed that for a second.
Kendrick Nunn, in that we didn't talk about him in terms of that.
No, let me see. I'm pulling him up now. The projection looks fine to me. I think the price jump is really not doing a lot for me. And also the fact that he looks he's 2% projected owned. So that kind of surprises me, though. Maybe that changes in another ownership run.
Probably comes up, I would think. Yeah. But, and he was a guy that's, got talked up a little bit through the day and has the opportunity to be productive. You mentioned, the projections right there. But again, I don't think the peripheral numbers are going to come up with him, especially at 6,200 on FanDuel. A little bit more in play maybe on DK at point guard, shooting guard, where you can move him around. But I just don't think he's going to be essential given all the value that we've got. And we want to get it a lot at the guard spots, it seems. With some of the big ceiling upside plays where, we've got cheap power forward, we've got cheap centers to work with. I think most of the guys where we want to roster the big name players are going to be slotting into those guard spots. So that's probably blocking him a little bit there too.
Yeah, and I think too at the price point, I would just go to Dragic. I think is really how it looks for me. Coming off the down game, none coming off the outlier game. That's sort of the way it normally is best to approach it. And looks like we got to about 915 likes. So unfortunately, I won't give you guys a top 5, but I'll give you guys a top 4. It's it's money time. Of course, how could I forget? That's people in the chat also pointing out that's why they haven't hit the like button. So yes, it's money time. All the viewership can now soar. Jordan can hit the cash register sound. We're all winning here when it's money time. But we got the top 4 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. DeMarcus Cousins, number 1 at 77%. Domantas Sabonis, number 1 at 31%. James Harden, number 3 at 30%. Jaylen Brown, actually more. I'm on FanDuel. My bad. This is FanDuel's ownership. Jaylen Brown, number 4 on 27%. I'm all over the place, guys. That's my bad. And Eric Gordon, I'll give this one for free because I screwed up there. Eric Gordon, number 5 on FanDuel at 25%. And on DraftKings, the top 4 owned plays, DeMarcus Cousins at 88%, Marvin Bagley at 21, Kyrie Irving at 18, Fred VanVleet at 18, though I imagine that'll come up if we get another run of ownership as we go. Terry, any of the chalk on either of these sites looking particularly bad to you? We talked about him here on FanDuel. Just to reiterate, because I did screw that up. On FanDuel, Cousins, Sabonis, Harden, Jaylen Brown, Eric Gordon. On DraftKings, we got Cousins, Bagley, Irving, VanVleet. We've talked about most of these guys as we've gone here, but is anybody a fade to you or you're trying to get much less in the field?
Out of those names, I would say that Bagley probably stands out as the guy that makes the most sense to maybe look away from, just given the other options that we've got at the spot and at the price tier. I've talked a few times about how I like the upside in some of those guard names that you mentioned. So Harden, Irving, Luka are all going to be in a fair amount of my lineups. Oladipo as well. They're all going to be highly owned, but I would have a fair amount of them over on DraftKings. Gordon is a guy who's going to get in there by process for sure, based on the numbers. He's also just a guy I never trust. I never love when he comes up. Seems like he burns me every time, but I'm going to have a pretty good amount of them. So I'll be right, probably above the field on that play as well. On the FanDuel side of things, let me just resort this guy. I actually kind of like where the field is at on most of these guys on FanDuel today. I think everybody's been pretty sharp. I'll probably end up a little bit under on an Otto Porter or a Thad Young. Like I might pick one of those guys to press up and bring the other one down a little bit. I think LaMelo Ball makes some sense to maybe push up on the field on. And then a guy who's popular, but I think maybe not popular enough as a pay up option at the point guard is Ben Simmons. He's not super pay up. He's only 8,000. Coming up in a decent amount of the optimals and drawing positive leverage, one of the few positive leverage spots among those highly owned guys. So maybe consider some Ben Simmons.
Yeah, and Daniel Gafford, I just gave him 26 minutes, so I could just this is a placeholder here in the hopes that that's where he gets to, and still, not a smash play by any stretch, but at a minimum salary, I think I'm going to force my way to about 15% of him just because that feels right to me. And you can make the case for a more here going against Charlotte, a lower pace team who also defensively doesn't offer a ton inside. So honestly, maybe 20% of me for Gafford. That's sort of I'm going to do a crunch here and try to get him in a little bit more. And our guys behind the scenes are working on the site. We're sorry about any issues anybody's having there. Unfortunately, it's the way it goes with some of these big slates. But the good news, Peter V gave in a $20 super chat for money time. And Terry, we talked about the views. We talked about it all. But there's no better sign to people actually spending money just to say money time in caps lock.
Not bad. Thanks. We appreciate that out there, Peter V.
Thank you, Peter, for doing
the
that.
Thumbs up that everybody gives and all that fun stuff. So that's awesome.
All right, so let's talk about Clint Capela because people are saying Capela chalk. It does seem to me like based on our most recent run of ownership, which we are hoping to get an update in here with the server issues that are going on. But with the most recent run we have, Capela was projected for under 10% ownership, closer to 5%. And I had an issue with him the other day. I actually mentioned it, I think, on the show, where I forced my way to Capela just because the projections didn't look fantastic to me. I think it's the same case today where I don't see how you get there based off of his rising price on DraftKings up to 8,300. I think, too, he benefited quite a bit from not having Hunter and not having Reddish in the mix. I think that just constricts things enough for a guy like Capela where he's not getting rebounds ripped from him. He's not having to box out so those guys can pad their stats. But today, if those guys are going to be back in, I don't know that I'd want to be on Capela. I guess with the ownership being this low, you can make an argument. So, Terry, I can see it both sides a little bit more with Capela just because we've seen the gigantic upside. He's not reflecting that in terms of ownership right now. But are you feeling Capela if he's going to be single-digit owned and his price, though, being up to maybe untenable levels?
So with the caveat that we are talking exclusively about DraftKings because I'm going to be 100% Boogie Cousins on FanDuel, I think he's all right. He's another one of those guys like we talked about. Boogie is soaking up 58.1% of the optimals as of the last time I was able to update this, and everybody else is kind of flat. So there's a couple guys that are going to be above 10% as we run that. And then there are, 20 some odd guys that are between like 10 and 5%, 10 and 4%, somewhere in there. And Capela's one of those guys. So we're talking about by optimal lineup appearance rate, the 15th ranked guy at the center spot. If we want to filter it around to boom score probability, he goes up. He jumps to the 6th ranked center option, power forward center option. I'm sorry, he's center only. On draft, nope, sorry, it's lower than that. 10. He's the 10th. So, yeah, he's a good player. He's got upside for sure, but there are better options. And I think there are better options when we consider the ownership. So I don't think he's mandatory. He's fine. If you get to him, if you've got 8,300 to spend, sure, you can click him and you're not taking a risk. You're playing with safety there. So I don't mind him, but he's not a guy I would be forcing in.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it. And forcing guys in, I think when their price is up and they're coming off the monster game, I would say normally not the approach that you generally advocate for. I know our boy Greg Ehrenberg also talks a lot about price sensitivity, and that's one of the things that he actively tracks. I think that's definitely the case for a guy like Capela. If you want to take the stab, it's still a pretty good matchup for him. But overall, I think, with the price where it is, I'd be a little more concerned. Wouldn't want to get above the field though. If you get a taste in there, because he's not going to be too highly owned. Anybody else on the Atlanta side, Terry, that you're getting a good amount of? Because I really thought I was going to get my way to more Trae Young, get my way to a little bit more of this game because of a high total. Atlanta and Minnesota, two teams who do play, or at least are capable of playing with a bit of pace, also capable of playing with not a great amount of defense either. I like the game. I just didn't get it from a DFS perspective, and it worries me a bit. So how do you feel about this game with Atlanta and Minnesota, Terry? And is there anybody you're getting more of if it's not Capela?
Yeah, I like the spot as well. I thought that all the pace and everything was going to come in, and I think it's just a matter of, DFS wise, the way that things snap together at the positions and where the upside is and where the value is tonight is kind of just blocking a lot of these plays. So you mentioned Trae. He was one of those guys that I thought at 9,900 on FanDuel, I thought I'd be getting to more of, but some of these other guys are jumping over that. So I'm going to probably have more than the field because the field's only at 5.8% on FanDuel. 4.7% over on DK, but the numbers don't suggest that he needs to be, massively overowned. Like I'm not going to be at 45% Trae Young against a 5% ownership, but if I'm at 15, I'm pretty happy about that. A guy that was coming up a little bit for me is John Collins at the power forward spot as like a mid-tier $6,800 power forward on FanDuel. I like the 25.4 boom probability on him that Alex has. On DK, it's a little bit lower, a little bit less mandatory. We've talked ad nauseum about some of the power forward and center options over there. So it would be Collins on FanDuel for me, followed by Trae Young.
All right, we are taking your questions too. So if you have any, pop them in the YouTube chat if we see them and it's a good one on there, or tag me on the premium Slack. We also, if you are an Awesemo Plus member, because of some of the server issues, Alex just dropped in the projections and ownership in an Excel spreadsheet. So that's our fail-safe plan there. Get on the Awesemo Plus Slack, the premium Slack, and get in there if you are looking for the data here while we try to figure out, while our tech elves, and actually, no, I shouldn't say elves, because that's very demeaning. I like the idea of there being adorable elves doing things, but it's actually a very hardworking tech team who is probably crying and dying inside. Is this?
I'm sure they're not happy.
Let's see.
I'm on customer support detail later, so I look forward to all your emails.
I hope you're ready for a lot of caps lock, Terry.
It's gonna be fun.
Caps lock and slurs coming in the support email later. Here's a question from the premium Slack. CAC2112 asking, is Tate at small forward okay, or is there somebody you like better on FanDuel the same price range? Did you get to any Jayshawn Tate with what we talked about earlier on the Rockets? Just so many guys missing there, and Tate has been a guy who's at least trying to get his way to get his shots up.
That was a FanDuel question?
Yep.
I don't think he was coming up very much for me the last time I ran a crunch, but that was eons ago at this point as far as the value and everything that's opened up. And I don't have the latest update still in my sheet here. So just based on the idea that he's a guy who should be getting some time with the ball in his hands, getting a little bit of opportunity there, I think it makes some sense. Only 4,600 on FanDuel puts him right in that same value tier as some of the other guys I talked about in the 5K range earlier. I like Eric Gordon better, but I think definitely there are going to be significantly more people on Gordon. So if you want to consider it a direct pivot off of Gordon to Tate for $600 savings, I think there's some interesting things you can do with that. I don't mind that. Not something I would go over the top on, but yeah, that's in play.
Also, I sorted through my Gafford exposure and, resorted the lineups and all that. And I'm still only getting 5% Gafford. I think, overall my projections are valuing DeMarcus Cousins a lot more. So just wanted to circle back on that because I did try to force my way to 20% and I still ended up getting 5% back. So I'm not going to tweak it anymore from that one. Got a question here from my boy Steve Leibovitz, who's always a great fan here on Awesemo. It supports a lot of our shows. He's asking, are you getting any OG Anunoby? I have to say he's the one Raptor I'm not getting, and that's a little bit of a concern for me, but I'm getting a lot more Siakam, a lot more VanVleet, a lot more Norman Powell. Norman Powell's going to be my highest exposed Raptor, it looks like. I even got a little bit of Terrence Davis, but I didn't get Anunoby. So Terry, do you feel any differently here about OG?
I hope I get to a little of him. He's a guy that I feel like the public doesn't get to. I feel like optimizers tend to bump him around. So when he lands in my lineups, I don't mind it. I don't love the price at 6,000 at that FanDuel small forward spot. There are a couple cheaper options we've already touched on that I like better there, but I think he makes some sense. He's not getting any kind of ownership. So you're just doing it basically to get away from the field with a guy who's going to get reliable run, his usual complement of minutes and usage. He is a 0.83 fantasy point per minute producer, basically. So he's fine. He's going to give you an OG Anunoby game with a little, probably 27, 28 points with upside to 35. If he gives you the 35 or a little bit better, a little higher, then you're winning. I don't love the play, but he's fine.
Yeah, I think that's about right for me. The logic there is certainly, sound, because there's just going to be an opening in terms of opportunity, and maybe more sound than I might realize. Because I'm not getting them in a crunch, those tend to be the plays that do bubble up the most here. A guy that just doesn't pop up with normal projections, and then stands to benefit just as well. So I think there's some logic there for GPPs for OG Anunoby. Mr. Moneybags, who, how could I not answer Mr. Moneybags question? My brother in money here on the premium Slack asking thoughts on Jalen Brunson. You think he gets good? I think Jordan really relishes hitting the cash register. He's nodding. Yeah, thank you, Jordan. That's Jordan Klein, our man behind the glass, along with Tyler, two of our great producers who help us make money time so fantastic here for all of you. But the question on Jalen Brunson,
Stern, buddy.
Yes, exactly. Jalen Brunson, do you have any for him for a DK GPP? Because he is actually a guy I've been getting to a lot, and I will be there again tonight. 25% Jalen Brunson. Okay, sure. Why not? Terry, how about you? How do you feel about Jalen?
I'll probably be somewhere in that range as well. I was getting a good amount of them on FanDuel. I've got my face in Fantasy Cruncher right now, just trying to get some semblance of a crunch run here before we hit lock. So I don't have Alex's stuff in front of me, but he was looking like a strong option throughout the day, and nothing's really changed there for me. So I'll have a good amount of Brunson. I think he's going to get a fair amount of run, and he produces in the amount of minutes. So I like him on his own. I like him playing alongside Luka. I have no problem with him on either side.
Also, it does seem like for Charlotte that we'll still have Biyombo starting, and not, just in case there's any concern there about his minutes being cut a little bit. And he may still be cut, but he's starting at least with Cody Zeller back in the rotation there. Let me see here. Morgan in the premium Slack asking, who is a low-owned stud that you both like on DK? I think Luka to me is too low owned. I don't think it's a brave take by any stance, rather. And I also don't mind Embiid, I guess, relative to the ownership. He's another guy under 5% owned. We just saw him have a monster day recently at no ownership at all. So I feel like he shouldn't be completely underrepresented, but Luka is the one I'm the most above of. Terry, how about you with the studs on DK? Is there anybody popping up or that you think would pop up a little bit more?
Yeah, let me just get over here. Looks like my answer from that I might have thrown out there on FanDuel is also going to be coming up on DK is Paul George. I think he makes some sense just going by the leverage score here. Decent little optimal lineup appearance rate, not huge, but good numbers across the board, and obviously that caliber stud player. So I don't mind that. Some of these other guys not getting to quite the optimal lineup number that I like. Let me resort by that and see if I can take a look at some of these prices. Maybe Kristaps Porzingis is somewhat interesting as a kind of mid-tierish, expensive mid-tier, or the bottom of the expensive tier at the power forward center spot. 11.6% of optimals, 18.4% boom on a 41 plus point projection. Not that expensive and drawing slightly positive leverage. Kind of interesting, and a name we haven't mentioned yet.
Also, Alex just dropped the ownership in the premium Slack as well. So if you want to get there with the server issues that our tech team's working through, that's up in there. And and just once again, because we do hate when stuff like this happens. Unfortunately, it's sort of the one of the issues. I can tell you as somebody who's worked in internet content for over a decade now, which God, I hate saying out loud, but you are going to find as sites grow, unfortunately, and scale. And on a day like this for DFS, sometimes it can be a bit of a pain with keeping the server stuff going in the right direction. So bear with us, and we're doing our best we can behind the scenes to sort through things. But now the top 5 owned plays on DK: DeMarcus Cousins, 84%, Fred VanVleet up to number 2 at 21, Norman Powell up to 21 as well, not 2021. Pascal Siakam just under 20, and Goran Dragic under 20. So now all of my boys are owned too much. So this screws up everything. On FanDuel, DeMarcus Cousins 75%, Goran Dragic 40, Fred VanVleet 30, James Harden 30, Domantas Sabonis 29. Terry, does this change anything for you? I just don't care. I give up. I'm not sorting lineups again. Does this change anything for you?
I think most of those names that you were on are all very good chalks. So I would, hopefully you're, somewhat maybe above the field where they come in. But yeah, I wouldn't panic and, try and get away from the guys that we think are going to be the best producers on the slate. I think those are the right plays to be on. If you end up a little bit more with the field than you intended to be, I think that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, Terry, if you knew the amount, I know our boy Josh likes giving exact numbers. I'm always ashamed of my numbers when they come through. And I'm going to be still about double these guys which is not the best spot, but unfortunately that's how it goes when we have a chaotic slate and we're doing a live stream here. So, hey, hit that like button, guys. It also helps keep our sanity where it should be. And yeah, I think this is one slate where we're all going to need to say a wing and a prayer for everybody. Let's see. Okay, people being mean in the chat. Don't I would say if you're in the chat, it's a community, help each other out, but don't call people morons, even if they're certainly morons. Sometimes morons right here on this side of the camera. But I would say for any of us, just don't just be positive energy breeds positive results would be what I would say. And I do live in California, so that's the kind of thing you'd expect from somebody who lives in my region. Let's see. Anything else, Terry, you're seeing in your final exposures? I'm trying to figure out, should I be playing this? It does seem like Terrence Davis also going to be kind of chalky, so I feel like that's worth pointing out. But anything else that you're seeing right now in your exposures that is worth talking about? Because there are so many games. We've clearly keyed in on a few here, but I just want to make sure we're representing the actual crunching process because this is going to be a chaos for a lot of people out there.
I think we've touched on, oh geez, I just pasted that into the wrong spot here. I'm so behind where I should be right now that it's difficult to answer that question based on any kind of reality of anything I've actually crunched. But I think we've hit on most of the core plays. It's a big slate. So what you have to expect is there's going to be something from out of left field, not some 0.1% owned guy that we've never heard of, but one of these star caliber players who we've maybe not talked about enough. Some random guy in a high paced game like D'Angelo Russell at 10% owned could certainly come out here and put up a 60-point night and break the slate. And we have to expect that. So in those spots where we're looking for different kind of plays, consider options like that are in that mid tier, that are, quality producers, quality players, not these total dart throws. And you're looking to put together low owned combinations of those guys in your lineups alongside all this good chalk that we've been talking about all through the entire show. I think that's really the approach that we have to take tonight and kind of get as wide a spread in those guys as we can, while really locking in on some of this very high-end value.
We got also one question here about the Capela ownership. He still is in the 5% range. So that's, I'll give you guys that one for free. It hasn't changed in any meaningful way. And I want to make sure, because it's going to be tough for a lot of people to manage things at ownership. So there's one with Capela that we can circle back and confirm. We still have him under 10%. Let's see here. Any other good questions in check of the premium Slack? It's somehow degenerating into political talk in the Slack with people blaming Democrats being voted in. You guys, I just want to tickle you all. It's really
Joe Biden did used to be our server guy, and he's got a new job now. So that is a big hit. So if anybody knows anybody out there.
Any Eric Gordon love on DK? We've talked about him on FanDuel today. On DK, I think even with adjusting rates a little, trying to get him in the mix a bit more, I don't think he's worth more than the 14% ownership for him on a slate of this size. I just don't. Oladipo's going to dominate the ball to me is really how I view it. I think in this spot against Detroit, I really don't view anybody who's going to stop Oladipo, and it's going to make him have to, relinquish possessions, which he has been very reluctant to do, even with Christian Wood on the floor. So to me, I'm not getting to Eric Gordon a ton on DK, and I don't see a reason to get much above the 14%. But Terry on DraftKings, obviously on FanDuel, a little bit of a different equation because of the positionality and all that. Are you willing to go to Eric Gordon in the field if he's going to be about 15% owned?
I think I'd probably be right around the field on him. That's where I was seeing him earlier in the day when I was looking at that spot for DK, specifically comparing to how much I was getting to him on FanDuel. So I think it's just a different kind of play site to site tonight. So I would be with the field. I'd be happy with that. But I wouldn't look to really try and push above. I really wouldn't necessarily look to cut below. But he's the kind of player that I don't mind moving off of if you've got your eye on somebody else at the position and the value.
Let's see here. Rozier or Jared Allen? Actually, go ahead.
I am now at 88% Boogie Cousins, so that's come down a little bit on FanDuel.
Who's the 12% then? Who else is getting in there?
I'm guessing some of it's going to DeAndre. I'm looking to check right now. Let's see.
Yeah, I got DeAndre is the one that I got to.
DeAndre,
I got him more. I still have. I think I ended up with 95% Boogie, but I did get Cousins. Got Cousins. Got DeAndre Jordan a little bit more than I expected. So probably getting some Cousins and DeAndre, and I think DeAndre is the pivot for me on DraftKings.
Yeah, it looks like some of those shares went to DeAndre. The bulk of them went to DeAndre. About half of what went to DeAndre went to Mitch Robinson, and it looks like I have one Nas Reed share.
Here's an interesting question from Tall the God in the YouTube chat asking, do I need to start anyone else besides Boogie in the early game? So I guess hoping that maybe things clear up with some of the data issues on the back end. In the early games for me, I mean, I've talked about my love of Victor Oladipo earlier. He to me is somebody that I would put in, but I don't need to lock him in. And in terms of not a lock, but I just want to bring it to the equation, Devontae Graham is somebody who I'm getting a lot of today, I think, because the Bulls are particularly bad at defending the three. So I think that's making him surface a little bit more. And that's one of the weird filtering things that I do, which helped with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope the other day, but maybe will put me on too much Graham today. But Graham's come down in ownership, so I feel actually pretty okay about being 3x the field on him. We have him now at about 10%. Is there anybody, Terry, who you'd consider a lock in the early games here? People are just trying to put in some placeholders and hope that they can get through while the data stuff works out.
At this point, I don't even honestly know which ones the early games are.
It's Chicago, Charlotte, Orlando, Indiana, and Houston, Detroit are the three that lock at 7.
Boogie would probably be if I was answering that. I somehow just sent the sort up instead of down. Boogie from the Houston game. I think we can get to some Oladipo from that game. Nobody that like you're, other than Boogie that you're, tragically missing out on that immediately leaps to mind. I'm going to be better as soon as I upload this.
Yes. Yeah, you focus on that. I'll take a couple questions here in the Slack. We got a question here from Mozim Dawi. Sorry, excuse me. I was saying your name off of memory and I was completely incorrect. It's Mozim Dawi. Cash game PF on DraftKings. Anything standing out? In terms of the ownership, I think it would probably be Siakam. You're following a guy who's getting a boost and also is going to be pretty decently owned. So I think that would be my power forward there. And I'll spare Terry the question while he finishes his lineups. He can chime in later. Somebody asking him, unless you want to chime in, Terry.
No. I was just saying, it looks like we're good on that crunch.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, this is the team effort here that goes on a live before lock, where you got to make sure your other guy is getting to the finish line too with his lineups. Question from DK Priest, or not even a question, just declaring Jamal Murray for a FanDuel GPP. I didn't get much of Denver because of Michael Porter Jr. being back in the mix. I think that's these guys are priced for the run without Michael Porter Jr. And you can still get to Jokic. He's a monster, but like his price is up so high on DraftKings that I don't see getting there. But you did ask about FanDuel, Terry. So do you feel like Jamal Murray is worth it on FanDuel?
He was coming up a little bit for me earlier in the day. In my model, he was point and change higher than in Alex's. So it looked like that little difference was forcing him into a not insignificant amount of lineups. I'll double check on how much I ended up with him in the final crunch here, but he looks all right. Like he's in that, good play, not a standout play from a DFS perspective, but a guy who's a reliable producer and should be fine tonight. No real reason to force your way there, but no real reason to, super have to get off of him for anything that, immediately leaps to mind. You mentioned MPG, whatever, you know who I'm talking about. Michael Porter Jr. coming back. Which could potentially take away some of the usage, but I think he's going to be okay. So I'd be more concerned about that hitting Jokic. It looks like I'm only going to have 2 Jamal Murray shares though in my FanDuel entries.
Yeah, and I think also Jokic, for what it's worth, some people in the chat saying don't mention Jokic. I guess people maybe going to him a little bit more in the hopes that that's a differentiating point in the slate. Like I do think if you're going to go to somebody and you're going to try to get really different from a lot of the Cousins ownership that's going to be out there today, Jokic to me, I think would be one that I would very much consider going to. Like I like Embiid pretty much on any slate, especially when he's this low owned. But Jokic, he's so far away price wise that you're not going to get a similar construction to 9/10 of the field. So that to me is a logical reason, as well as the fact that Jokic's floor, even if like Michael Porter Jr., MPJ does actually cut into things a little bit, like you could still see Jokic, I think, have a 50 fantasy point day. And DeMarcus Cousins, even if he's a monster and plays 25 minutes, like he's going to have a hard time getting to 50 fantasy points, or at least should theoretically. So I would say that Jokic is definitely an interesting play if you are maybe doing a single entry. I think that's one way to consider though Cousins, just DFS wise, that's the kind of plays you wait for.
Yeah, for sure. And Jokic and Embiid are really the two guys that I'm concerned burn me on the Cousins play. Either one of those guys could come out here and roll a 70 that becomes somewhat mandatory regardless of the pricing. But like you mentioned, if you put one of them into your roster instead of Boogie Cousins, you're starting down a very different path. With some of the emergent value at some of the other positions that we've touched on, like from Toronto, like from Miami, you can get there into relatively close optimal constructions, but it's not the same. So you'll be very different from the field, but you'll probably be very different from the field and a decent amount lower when all's said and done. So I still prefer the Cousins play. I think you sacrifice too much if we're talking about just exclusively playing one center.
And this Awesemo site is back working now just in time for everything. But hopefully you have placeholders in, you can do some swapping. We talked in the show recently about swaptimizing. Also did the late Slate show with Eric Lindquist the other day where we talked at some length on swaptimizing there and how just an overall approach to that and how you should probably be doing it for most slates. So, try to use that if you can. Make sure you get your placeholders in. I feel like, it sucks when stuff like this happens, but always make sure to get placeholder lineups in just so you have something in there in case things do go awry completely. But we have a few seconds left to lock. Terry, anything you want to say here? Any final words of encouragement? And this slate, that's pure Dark Knight Joker playbook here for what we've had to deal with.
I think I can just leave everything at let's go Boogie Cousins. I've got a fair investment in you tonight, sir.
Yeah,
he'll get ejected. Just to talk to that narrative, he'll be ejected by the 5-minute mark.
If he gets ejected at the 5-minute mark of the game, I feel like I will come on this show tomorrow. I have to do the deeper dive tomorrow with our boy Greg Ehrenberg, and I will come on this chat and be like, you know what, YouTube chat, you absolutely nailed it. I will yield to them for an entire day.
How much does Top Shot's volume spike if Boogie fouls out or gets ejected early and all the DFS players just flock over to Top Shots?
You get your Boogie Cousins technical foul ejection Top Shot coming up on the site. Hopefully that works well. Got Kai Roach asking, got a poor time hat. There's no such thing as poor time because you know what? On the nights that it goes poorly, it's all aspirational money hat wearing. We're trying to earn real diamonds and gold on this hat one by one. Terry, thank you, Jordan. Terry, people should follow you at DigitalB21. I think you have a live before lock coming up tomorrow, right? So what are the plugs for you here on the Awesemo YouTube?
Yep, me and EMAC, I think tomorrow on live before lock, and then I think it's a little bit calmer the rest of the weekend for me than last weekend. I'm not on multiple shows this weekend, so
Marshall,
you guys miss out.
A cent sign, poor time. That honestly wouldn't be the worst spit on nights where I just don't feel it. If you see me have a cent sign, just ignore everything I'm saying and fake all the plays. Follow me at
expression.
I'll be back tomorrow doing the deeper dive with Greg Ehrenberg. Also, I did my show Splash Play with Peter Overzet and Greg Ehrenberg, our fantasy football show where we talk about everything. Go check that out because Greg was a lot of fun. I always have a great time doing these streams here for Awesemo with Greg. We got a little bit different, a little bit weird on there. So check out Splash Play. And of course, follow at Awesemo_com. Check the pinned tweets. Always lots of giveaways on there. And make sure to subscribe. We're so close to 50K. So get over that hump for us here and subscribe to the channel. So that way, if there's anything else going wrong on the internet, you can come on the Awesemo YouTube and know that we're giving you guys some good information as best we can. Thanks to Jordan Klein. Hope you guys have a great weekend. See you guys again soon.
Is it going to be fun to figure out what actually went into some of these lineups?